All right. Good everything, Nubians. Hello. Hello, Dr. Carr.
Hello,
Hello.
Miss Hunter. How are you?
I'm good. I was just telling you I was doing my morning walk and getting my brain juices flowing. And I'm thinking about a lot of things, thinking about Will Smith's movie,
Mm.
Emancipation, and and he answered the question we all had, do we need another slavery movie? And he was like, told Willow, no, this is a freedom movie. But I just that quick, he's not canceled.
Or is he? I don't know. We gotta see what the box office does. I saw. Did you see he was on what is it? All the Smoke
Oh, was
podcast.
he? I didn't know he was on all
Yeah,
that. People
he,
go on that thing, huh?
I saw about 20 minutes of him and the two brothers. What is it? Steven Jackson and I forget the other one.
Matt Barnes.
Matt Barnes, right?
Yeah, yeah, the one.
And it's never a surprise what this society promotes as journalists. And hey, but hey, I'm wondering why you think he picked them to break his silence.
I'm sure there's a cipher of celebrity, athlete, entertainers. They roll in
Mm.
circles, and you know that Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson probably going to have his. They're not going to expose him. It's one of the things about being a journalist. I was always very wary of is that I'm never your friend. Like
Ah,
some
yes.
stuff, even in writing books, they would assume because I'm there to gather information, which is a little, it's a weird position to be in, but I'm very clear that I'm never your friend. I am always there. I'm the friend of the people who need information. I am not your friend. I am
About that.
friend. Now, if I'm writing a book with you, I'm going to take care of you and protect you. But even then, there has to be a line. And I watched several of my journalism colleagues cross that line many, many times to very successful careers,
Hmm.
because because you can be, make a lot of money doing that, crossing lines, and come out the other end being okay,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's when I realized that journalism was probably never going to, maybe it never was what I thought it was, but I'm like, if you can cross a line and still have a career, is there a line? What, maybe I'm, living this by these rules that don't exist. And I see
Ooh,
how we can like get into this space where, well, nobody's following rules, then I'm not going to follow rules. And then I had to stop myself and I was like, just because no one else is following them, these are proper rules, because what they're saying is you should never be compromised by the relationships that you're in to not deliver what people deserve to have, which is the truth. And if your relationships force you into a position where you're choosing your friendship over the truth, then you're no longer a journalist and you should step down. And I feel that way, like judges and
wow.
people should recuse themselves if they do not have the capacity to keep the boundaries very clear about what it is you're here to do. And either you're a journalist or you're a friend. I don't think you can be both. But we're in strange times.
You're a trained journalist. In addition to having a celebrity status, but you attain that status through your work. I mean, it's not like you were playing the sports you wrote about for years and then became known that way, and then they turned to other things. You're a trained journalist. But that choice between the truth, between the way you want to live your life and the way that you kind of have been raised and the world, yeah, that's ironically when Ta-Nehisi Coates takes the title of his book Between the World and Me from Richard Wright. Here's what Richard one of the things Richard Wright was talking about: between the world and me. There's this thing between the world and me. And how much of yourself are you going to project out in the world? And how much of the world are you going to let shape you?
And being with you in community for the last 2+ years, I'm also thinking, is this quote unquote righteousness? Is it indoctrinated righteousness? Because the world that we live in that tells us, how to live, never live that way, right?
Ha,
So do you know what
right.
I'm saying? Like, and
Oh,
rules
yes.
before those rules were to keep us in line. So am I perpetuating, like these are the things that I have to like every day examine. Am I perpetuating a myth of righteousness that never existed, but only existed to keep us in line? And if that's the case, then what do I do with that? Do I do you know what I'm saying?
I do. I
So
do.
so but I feel like, those of us who have African drum beats in our spirits, we know what right is. and it's not even what your mama and your grandmama put in you or your daddy or whatever. There is a due north. I think there is a due north in terms of how we treat one another, and I think love has to be, the constant, reminder of what we're here to do: love, community, growth. A tree by the fruit that it bears. All of those kinds of things. I was reaching out to Dr. Mario Beatty because I was like, is there a word in meta nature for grace? Is there a word in meta nature for grace? And how do we suss that out? How do we love people who don't know that they're harmful? What do we do with them? I know banishment is one thing, but if they don't know because of how we've been socialized, and greed is good, and it's confusing. I don't even know how people raise children today. It's like, what do you teach them? Because then they're like, but mommy, the president just, or mommy, it's like,
Exactly.
the man that's on my TV or Good Morning America. So like cheating is wrong, but what's going on here? Like there's too many questions we got to answer that don't fall in line with what is right and wrong, which we know, right? So I
Mm.
don't know.
No, I mean, what did he offer a word?
Oh yeah, he did. Hold on. It is in the framework hold on. Let me so I got it. And I should be memorizing these things. Here
No,
we
no,
go.
no, no. I mean, there's so much. I mean, there's so many different. I'm just
Uh
curious.
yeah, he said grace hetepet.
Hetepet. Aha, because Hetep is kind of like a version of Hotep, peace. Peace, calm. It doesn't really translate as one word. I'm sure he gave you a long dispensation on it because Mario's a language guy. Hetepet. Yeah, that's interesting. You often hear people, because we know they didn't pronounce, we don't know how they pronounced Meta Nature. Obviously, it's not a language that is spoken, although people claim to speak it, and I don't have any pushback against that, because how would we know? If there's no correct way to say Qatar, then we know, but anyway, sometimes you hear people say Hetepu when as a greeting. It's almost like saying peace or extending this sense of community. So I suppose grace in that broader sense, I'm extending to you a kind of wish for our common humanity. Um, Hotep, you'll hear people say, but he was very specific and said hetepet. Uh, Did he say how he translates
We
that?
didn't have a conversation. This was text messages back and forth, and I'm
Okay,
sure
good.
he
No, no,
was
I'm
in the
just
middle of
yeah, he could probably do a week on it. I'm sure he could, because I know Mario was here connected to everything else. Because those words appear. I mean, in a society with, roughly speaking, 3 millennia of unbroken history, at the foundation of which, remember, we talked about this in the African States class a couple of conversations ago. We talked about governance, when the idea that at the core of this African society was community. So they weren't looking to set up barriers between themselves and other people in the Nile. They were trying to join, as Jacob Brothers talks about, Tawi, the two lands, the upper and lower parts of the Nile Valley. But at different moments in their existence as a formal state, so to speak, they would pull different words. Like the Middle Kingdom, they had a concept among the throne name of the leaders of the Peruwa would be Wahemi Mesu, repeat the birth. In other words, after a time of trouble, Rekhammenen, when they have real time of disunity and invasions and that kind of thing, they would then say, if we're going to renew, we can't start today as if this the first time. What happened the last time we had division? So they would say Wahem, which is repeat, Mesu, which is a word for, which means to be born, Messi or Mesu. By the way, we know Moses was an Egyptian name. That's the root of the word, of the name Moses. They drew him out of the water, birth, Mesu. So even his name not Hebrew. So let's say less. But because I want people to start, right? Exactly. We say, well, you're right. Okay. You know what? Go get a grammar, Egyptian grammar. Get James Allen. Come to narrative, learn your meta nature. We're not now going into the, But I'm saying I have to say that Hetepet, I don't know off the top of my head, and I know he does. I'm sure there's a moment in their history where that became the favorite moment. And here we are in Western calendar year 2022, near the end of it. and we need het to pet more than ever. Was there a reason that came into the front of your mind to?
Yeah, because you know, I was actually talking on the radio about Will Smith, and I'm gonna watch Emancipation because I can
Of
stream it
course, of
on
course.
Amazon, so I ain't got to go to the theaters and be breathed upon. But I was like, he didn't slap
You
me,
ain't got to buy out the car, and the Negroes come sit in your seat
Yeah,
anyway.
I
You gotta
don't have
extend
to
het
stress
to
out.
pet, or no, one of the Egyptian word for that might be let me see, ma'at would be balanced, ordered, kind of a they had a word that Europeans translate as chaos, but it's not coming to me at the moment. Anyway, so you ain't got to worry about that. Yeah.
None of it, right? Amazon Prime, which also has from Hebrews to Negroes, Negroes to Hebrews on it still, because they're not taking it down because it's free speech. Anyway,
Get money, get money, Jeff.
uh,
Anyway.
so yeah, so I was like, people are still outraged, and thank you, LeBron James, for framing it. Have that same energy. That's the message. Have that same energy. If you're not gonna have that same energy, then again, that due north, does it apply to everybody? That outrage, are we all required to be outraged about it? And if you're outraged, we're supposed to be outraged. And if we're not outraged, then something's wrong with us. And like who sets that table? And again, you told us something that stuck with me, and I've been beating this drum off mic, that we're your parents. We came here first. And I said to a brother of mine I was talking with this week, I said, it is our responsibility to be good parents. No longer, I'm not taking advice from a child. The child is not going to rule my life and tell me how to do, how to live, how to be. And as a result, I'm your mama. You're going to sit down and listen. And because I know better, and you don't have to agree with it, but you'll find out, or you'll F around and find out. Those are two paths that you have. But I think it's our responsibility to step into that role, since you said, I'm your dad. You told us that.
No
We
question.
came first. So we set the framework for humanity. So why are we listening to these people, knuckle dragging, cave dwelling, black people, for how to be, when we should take our rightful position? I don't even know how they got in the government and ruling everything. Yes, the bullet and dynamite are powerful things. But it's time now. It's time for us to. But first, we have to reclaim who we are. To your
Right.
point, the
'Cause
birth.
we don't remember.
We
Yeah,
have to remember who we
we have
are.
to remember.
But
Yep.
those of us who remember, you have a job. Be a good parent.
That's so true. It's so funny you say that, because in the context of, even as we're having this conversation, and by the way, you all, those of you who haven't, you're not in narrative, or you haven't, if you are, you haven't taken advantage of this world-class meta class that the Beatty continues to teach new lessons every week. There's nothing like it anywhere.
Oh my
You
God.
get your money up and spend $40,000, $50,000 and go to Harvard, or go to UCLA and go take MetaNet, or go to University of Chicago. And when you get in there
Can
after
I
a week,
pause you too,
oh, please,
because even if you go to Harvard and everything, you're not going to learn the glyphs. You're not
no,
physically, because they don't know how to do. So
no,
it's not just learning
teach.
the hieroglyphs. It's the spiritual journey of the glyphs drawing. Because I'm not artistic, but in sitting there, there's a meditative process and spiritual process of all of these symbols and coming together and what they mean. But it's in the drawing that you get imbued with this like power of what actually this stuff means. And I haven't experienced anything like it. And I know that Harvard doesn't teach it that way,
They
because
can't.
they don't know how to.
No,
And to have this man every Tuesday in Nubia have a class that can't be found anyplace is just so powerful. So
no,
yes,
no,
thank
please.
you, Mario Beatty.
If you say something more about that, because I wasn't going to make that observation, and that really is the observation that needs to be made. What you just said, you would waste your money going somewhere else, because not only would you not learn the language the way that the world tells you should learn language instruction, the grammar, the vocabulary. This is superior to all of those places, and there isn't a place on the planet where they teach Egyptian language where Mario Beatty's name isn't known among the finest of those people. But what you said is the thing itself. Language is the, of course, conduit of culture. And even if you took those, wasted your money and took them those places, you wouldn't ground it in what you just said. I hope you would, as we would learn our first meta lessons with Jacob Carruthers and Mayi Roosevelt Roberts, Javon Jones. I remember, as you say, when it doesn't matter whether you're artist, right? Coming through your fingers, scratching those lines, trying to get those little birds, drawing those circles, trying
The
uh,
bread basket,
yeah,
the hook just right. Yes, yeah.
that's coming to you, right? I remember the first thing I told my Roosevelt Roberts, who's an ancestor now, I said, brother, it's like they're talking to you. So when you said that, I hope everyone who hasn't experienced that yet grasps what you just said, because everyone who has tried, it's like, yeah, it isn't it? It's like it's something enters you different. It's very different.
It's like this, right? We've all taken history classes where
Mhm.
they're going to give you dates and memorize these people and this happened here, and but you connect the dots in a way that it makes it part of our soul, like, oh, okay, and I'm connected to this history and these people and these times, and this is why it's relevant, right? So taking Meta Nature with Mario Beatty is similar to that, because it's not just symbols on a wall. There's a connection to your soul and your spirit and your actual lineage, on this earth. And to be able to write thoughts, like you said, grace. It's not just a word. There's a
Right.
whole etymology behind how we get to grace. And it's usually a story about community. And this is, everything. So I'm like, yeah, I'm so grateful.
Oh no, this is I am too. I mean, you're right. That gratitude and that gratitude, it's a worldview, language, as you say. I mean, it's fet. It's fet is the name, is the word. It doesn't really translate into chaos. And here's the thing: language is worldview. The the Egyptians and really African people generally, we start talking about languages. In fact, there's something so funny. I just got my hands on. This is the season when they jump and they backstop, and I was looking. I've been stalking this book for the
Hold on.
better part of years. Called
Hold on. Let
and
me
don't look.
let me do
Paul
this.
Gray books are absurdly overpriced. So don't nobody run out and I didn't pay what they. If you go look this up, you can be like, oh my God, is you? No, 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 no. I paid a small, tiny fraction of the price. Because I stalk books all over the world. But anyway, this book, the Paul Gray Handbook of African Traditional Religions, very interesting. This is a book, and the reason I've been stalking it earlier this year, I was very blessed, as you say, and very fortunate and very grateful to have had a conversation with Toyin Falola, who've mentioned many times, the Yoruba professor, scholar, um, intellectual worker who is just a machine. He co-edited this with another professor, Professor Adirigbe, and it is a compendium of ways of knowing from the continent. Palsgrave does these books, but it's like everything else that comes out of the current social structure. Now that there is African life to be profited from in the latest iteration of Define, then you go out and publish books on the subjects that you're determined to continue to control. But in the long arc of what Jacob Carruthers used to always call the intellectual warfare, we push back, and sometimes we use these conduits to advance our interests. And so this book is divided into three parts. Part one, basic essential features of African traditional religion. Part two, contemporary interconnections, contents and discontents. And part three, on pedagogy research and foundation scholars. Now, I mean, I got a whole section of texts around the questions of African spirituality, and none of them or could ever be a substitute for undergoing that process. And we talked about this when we were in the governance section of our conversation in the Introduction to African States class. We're currently deeply involved in Nubia. The whole question of how you enter a space, how you enter a communal space. You're born into a space or you are reborn into a space. If you weren't originally born there, you're planted in it. You are brought into that space to learn how people interact with each other and move through time and space collectively in a space. And then as you acquire some level of comfort, familiarity, and then felicity in terms of being able to move through that space by the protocols, to borrow from Angie Porter as she works out this theory of Africana legal studies. You reach a point when you are invested with responsibility to maintain and extend the space. Maladumo Some, so many of us know that. We've heard Lurie Daniels favors among many others talk about his work, recent ancestor of Water and the Spirit, so many others. I think I was introduced to Water and Spirit by my good friend Afia Zakia, Dr. Zakia, who's down in Mobile, as we talked about now, with the descendants of the Clotilda, now working with that foundation in Mobile. But Somé talks about this, and at that moment when you're invested in responsibility, you don't just get the responsibility. There's a step in that process. It might be known as initiation. It might be known as initiation now, in terms of how we use language, the English language, to kind of describe these processes. And the process by which you move through initiation, you come out on the other side with an investment of expectation and responsibility you didn't have before you undertook that. And you might call that watershed moment or rite of passage. We talked a lot about Kimwandende Kia Bunseki Fukuyao, Dr. Fukuyao, the Congolese scholar, now an ancestor who really taught so much after he came to the United States from Central Africa to talk about this question of initiation, rites of passage. And there's so many others. But if we just step back and look at this as a human process, we know that we all go through rites of passage, collective activities, common activities, good, bad, or indifferent. But when you're perpetuating a society, you're being invested with responsibility. In a very narrow sense, you can think about that when you go through school and go to graduation. It's a rite of passage. When they dress up kindergartners in caps and gowns and give them little rolled up pieces of paper, sometimes with nothing on it. When you then go to the 7th or 8th grade and they have a ceremony and they call that, I went to my nephew's graduation. Yeah, it's not graduation. Graduation is technically when you move from high school and you get that diploma from high school in the United States. And then you go to college as a college graduation. All those are rites of passage, because after you go through them, you will then have an initiation into another community, another level of community, in which you exist as one of a group that is part of a larger group, theoretically, that has responsibilities now. Now the question is, what are those responsibilities? Why are you in school? In human societies that don't detach any of these professions, any of these acquisitions of knowledge or experience, don't detach those things from a larger group sensibility, a larger community, there's a different type of expectation. In a society like in the contemporary world, particularly the settler colonies of the Western Hemisphere, so-called Western Hemisphere, including the one where, Professor Hunter, you and I are sitting here in the United States, because this isn't a community of one culture, the expectations that people have are informed by the social structure that we find ourselves in. So the expectations are baked into that structure. Now, the part of our warfare, part of our intellectual warfare as African people in this particular country called United States, is to extend the expectations we have in our communities outward, pushing back against expectations that are attempted to be imposed on us, so that we can be able to extend ourselves into the future. Hence, the language that we happily borrow from Dr. Mariba Kelsey, down there in Atlanta, who for many years on the faculty of Ohio State University, which is where we all, myself, Dr. Beatty, Dr. Watkins, met his wife, Mama Nyambi, his daughters, Reba and Romani, his son, Madibo, and the whole community in Columbus, Ohio, the African Center for Study of Worship, which continues in various iterations, the Afrocentric Personal Development Shop, Tawi Family Village, Mama Lona, Baba Hatem, so many others. Well, Baba Reba, when he would be at the job at Ohio State, and as I said before, they be in faculty meetings, he sometimes be the only person of African descent in there, and they coming after him, or they arguing each other, and he would sit back. He's just so cool. Say, don't you know I'm your grandfather? And it would just drive them crazy. But see, they wouldn't accept that, but they knew he believed it, and somewhere deep down they know it too. You know, sometimes you can know a thing in your bones. I asked Fatima Jackson about epigenetics, but Dr. Jackson. But at the same time, whether you accept it or not isn't the point. Isn't the point. The point is that we know it and we will act accordingly. But we live in a society in the United States where there is no common community. There's a lot of talk about common community, but at key moments you see the thing revealed for what it is, which is what? A bunch of human beings pressed into what is essentially a crime scene. And we talked about that last week, and we talk about it every time around this year. We start talking about indigenous people. People trying to grapple toward a present where they can live and a future to be better than the present. But everybody is not of one accord. So when you're initiated into this society, when you go through rites of passage here, it often comes out as trauma. Again, I mean, and we'll put all this in the context in a moment. For people of African descent in a place like the United States of America, the community that we speak of is not America. As I was saying at my friend Nicole Hannah-Jones's launch of her Center for Journalism and Democracy at Howard a couple of weeks ago, I said, when you see Black people in the United States of America waving the American flag, that's often cosplay. So you'll leave us alone. Oh, yeah. See, yeah, oh, yeah, America, man. In other words, get out of my face. Just leave me alone. I don't, I can see a few people shifting in their chairs, but most of the Black people there, for the most part, just kind of laugh because we know. See, we know. It's very rare that you get a governance conversation in a social structure category, because when it does, it shocks the hell out of people. I thought you loved me. Yeah, it's like your pets that you spay and neuter and give slave names and stuff like that, but you always lock the front door. Why? Because somehow Barfy is going to leave your house if you leave the door open, because Barfy's friends, the Maroons, they over there across the street in the bushes. You call them the wild dogs. Barfy's a house dog. At least you thought Barfy was. You don't even know Barfy's name. Barfy's name is really, but see, you can't speak dog. So anyway, but you got to convince yourself that Barfy loves you. But why do you lock the door if Barfy loves you? Well, in the United States, when you start talking about a common culture, no, you got to stand up and salute the flag. There's a cosplay, but when you look past the cosplay, it was funny. I don't know, you probably know him. I've only met him once. Good brother, Florida A&M alum, comedian, Roy Wood. I know you know Roy. You probably talked to him many times, haven't you?
He's the homie. Roy is wait, Roy. I just interviewed him again last week because he just produced a documentary with CJ Hunt, who's his fellow compadre on the Daily Show. He comes in with the Marcus Garvey John on that I sent him. And we were talking, he's like talking about Senora, because Senado's his, I was like, these degrees of separation, because I met Senora through you.
Yeah, and Roy be in DC, no question.
Roy and I go back, and then he brought up Senora, and I was like, I think there's a gathering happening.
That's what it is.
And so, yes, Roy is special. He's everything. He loves us. And he's about this life. So yeah, I'm glad you brought him up. But what were you going to say about him?
No. I'm just saying, I was grading some papers last week, and I came across, I hadn't seen it. Father Figure, I guess his new stand-up.
Yes.
Hilarious. That brother is hilarious. In fact, the closest I ever came to being memed, he came here for the Daily Show to do a thing when they had the anniversary of the Million Man March. And he interviewed me. So we're standing in front of the United States Capitol, and we're talking about, I'm talking about how this isn't really a nation. People say, you ask me the first 5 words of the national anthem, and I don't say, oh, say, can you see? I say, lift every voice and sing. And he said, oh, that's the Black national anthem? Roy Wood said, I thought it was Summertime by Will Smith. So I make this face like, okay. But anyway, it was hilarious. But anyway, but he said something in this stand-up. I'm grading papers. I'm looking over. I can't really grade and watch something like that at the same time. So I'm really checking citations. I'll go back and read for content. And then he said, Black people, when you ask them about, we ain't talking about America. We don't talk about America. We talk about what city can you go to and have the most fun? And everybody started laughing. Said, this is a governance articulation. People will be shocked. Black people don't be thinking about that flag or we're Americans. No, they think about, you go to Atlanta for this, you go to Miami for this. All the Black dead on. And it was a brilliant observation. And you know, that's what comedians do. Black comedians, it's why they always talking about race. They're really not talking about race. What they're giving you, if you listen, is a little glimpse into the governance formation. What they're really giving you a little glimpse into is what we think when y'all ain't around. And there are moments when you engage in a critique of the social structure, they become uncomfortable. And you know, interestingly enough, Chris Rock, when he made the movie Top Five, I mentioned this before, when you know the whole at the crux of that movie with he you know as his character, which runs around in a Kanye West kind of bear costume in his movies, in other words, a minstrel, a clown, a buffoon. Then he wants to make a movie about a rebellion of enslaved people, and the movie falls flat on his face. He wants to be taken as a serious actor. Well, you know, the premise of that Top Five movie, as he and Dawson go, because Rosario Dawson plays this journalist who is engaged in her own form of cosplay, gendered cosplay in disguise, in professional disguise, interviewing him. You see the Chris Rock character at the crossroads of a dilemma. How much quote unquote truth do I expose this audience that has been cultivated by watching me as a minstrel? How art mirrors life. But at any rate, you know, there are comedians who will then be critics of race, racial critics, and people mistake those jokes for, as Earthquake, the other comedian, would say, in talking about intra African, intra Black governance structure conversations. Everybody's laughing. He said, "These ain't jokes." In other words, you got to understand, Black people have a different conversation going on when it's just us, and comedians stand sometimes at that border, and I said this before, between governance and social structure. And when you hear that articulation, you should distinguish between the articulations that are critiquing the social structure and the ones where they're exposing you to how we think a little bit. So when Roy said that, he said Black people won't be thinking about America. We're thinking about where can you go, which city can you go to have the most fun. In other words, our relationships are local, and in some ways, what it reveals is that all human relationships are local. They start with the people closest to you and expand out. Now, depending on the social structure you're in, that home, that community, that immediate conversation, okay, can expand outward. So that, say, for example, you're in a Scandinavian country, or you know, let's say you're in Sweden, for example, or the Netherlands or Denmark. Well, the language, the rituals, the rites of passage and initiation will be strongly familiar between your household, your community, and the concept of the country itself. Because there's a lot of what, you know, anthropologists, sociologists we might call homogeneity. I was watching a conversation that the great African scholar Oyewunke Oyewumi was having, and she, who of course her most probably well-known text, something that Dr. Vliethe Watkins Beatty teaches a lot, the book The Invention of Women, where she says these Western concepts of gender get superimposed on people of African descent, and that's when the fun starts. But she was having a conversation. She was in a conversation with a South African sister, and they were talking about this pushback against these Western attempts to define who African people are. She said, when I came to the United States from Nigeria, and she's Yoruba, when I came to the United States from Nigeria to study, to go to school, I was in, she's in the University of California system. She said, I was in anthropology. I'm sorry. She said, I was in sociology. This is the point. And she said, these white professors were like, they would ask me what I was studying, and I would tell them. And she said, they would say, well, you should be in anthropology. And she said, you see, in this system, in this Western system, these Europeans would say, if you're studying your own community, that's sociology. If you're studying other people's community, that's anthropology. So she would say, well, by that definition, I'm a sociologist. Why? Because I'm studying my community. She's studying African people generally, Yoruba people in particular, her particular strain of Yoruba, where she's very granular in terms of her approach. She's looking at how gender operates. She's edited a book called What Gender is Motherhood. In other words, I'm going to explode these Western concepts, but I'm not doing it as a critique of the West. I'm doing it because I want to understand my society better through these disciplinary lenses you've given us and whatever, if I can use them at all. And she said, this she understood. By anthropology, what you're really saying is other means other than you. Because I am from this community. So that would make me a sociologist by your definitions. But you want me to be in anthropology because when you think Africa, when you think African people, you're thinking other. Now, if you take that into a U.S. context, where does that leave the African born in the United States? Who are we to each other? And I'm not a sociologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a historian. In the Western academy, the Western academic framing, my training, my approach, my work, my community is literally Africana studies. Africa, when and wherever you find it, overflowing the boundaries of these artificial nation states, these lines that have been drawn over the last several hundred years. It becomes very difficult for people to understand. So, well, so you're a historian? No, I told you what I am. No, you are you in philosophy? I mean, are you in? No, but you studied law, so that you're no. Yeah, I have command of tools, language, vocabulary, process, methodologies to even come in and out of any of those conversations. But let me be very clear about this. My home is Africana in this social structure context you put in. People just rejected it. At which point you just evoke Reba and Kelsey and say, yeah, well, don't you know I'm your grandfather? You don't know. Well, I'm going to behave that way because I am. In other words, I'm not going to respect these boundaries. So let me tie some of this together as we're thinking about this in the context. Whether it be a comedian giving you a glimpse into how people of African descent are interacting with each other, whether it be a film where the star of that movie, Will Smith, Emancipation, coming out, is playing a brother. I think maybe in the movie, his name is Peter, but Whipped Peter was one of the nicknames he was given in real life in 1863. A brother who received the name Gordon Smith, maybe his last name. 1863, he escapes from a plantation in Louisiana, makes his way through about 40 miles in a week and a half to the front lines of the Union Army, the invading Union Army in Louisiana, and is employed in service as a scout and these kind of things, recaptured by the Confederates and escapes again. And in the process of being captured, this brother was photographed. Photography in its kind of infancy there in the 1860s, 1840s, 50s, 60s, the daguerreotype and so forth. But then, so he's photographed because, among other things, his back is a map of scars. This is the famous photograph that you see in most compendium of African people in the United States during enslavement. The brother with his back to the camera, and you just see these welts that have risen up over his back over the years from having been whipped and beaten mercilessly, whipped bloody, and then the scars heal, then whipped bloody again, and more scars heal till his back is basically a raised map, a road map of violence. And it's a very famous photograph. Well, this is the brother that Will Smith is playing, a spectacle of torture. This is the legacy of African people. And I too will go, I think the theatrical release was the second, I think it was this weekend, maybe it was yesterday. And I know it's playing a couple of places in Washington, in DC. Maybe I'll go there, or maybe like you here, and I'll just wait. I think it's Apple TV. I don't know if it's
You know what? It is Apple. It is Apple. I
don't trust my
opportunity. I wanted opportunity to shade Amazon while we were at it, but yes, it is.
You went ahead and called him my mouth. No, I love it. I love it. Yes. I mean, but, it's interesting because, again, we're seeing this. Okay, so let me draw the parallel, and not through the slap, but through the real slap between Chris Rock and Will Smith. In Top 5, Chris Rock plays a character who is not taken seriously, but is hugely famous for his ability to entertain through spectacle, who we are to other people, who then wants to be taken serious by making a movie about a whole rebellion of enslaved Africans that nobody goes to see. That's in the movie. And in real life, Will Smith, who has made a career out of first being not taken seriously, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, rapper, this kind of thing, and then transitions into these more meaty roles, but primarily being non-offensive, whether it be lightweight venues like Hancock or Imaginary America expanded into humanity, superimpositions of American settler colonialism on the world versus the aliens like Independence Day. Today is our Independence Day. Yeah, y'all just keep on pushing this settler colonialism. Now the whole world is with you, right? The Americans, they figured it out. And so, Will Smith has integrated himself even in theoretically controversial moments, like with Gene Hackman and Enemy of the State. You know what I'm saying? In I, Robot, the whole idea that somehow this kind of, or I Am Legend, both of those last two based on short stories that predate them by decades. The whole idea that Will Smith is every man, that's usually language in the so-called humanities for white. And this is from somebody who, by the way, who played Everyman as an undergraduate at Tennessee State. We did Everyman. Everyman, of course, is the name of a play from medieval England, where you see every man comes in. But every man really means this is the normative white way of being that kind of superimposed on everybody. So Will Smith is every man until he slapped Chris Rock in the mouth. At which point, are we safe? Why? Because see, that's a governance moment. Right, wrong, wherever we come down on it. And we know that we really don't have those conversations in mixed company. The way Black people feel about that slap, you probably, if you are not in community with African people, you didn't really get a full kind of rehearsal of the range of opinion about that. And as we were saying before, Will Smith chose to go on the All the Smoke podcast to talk about the new film, basically. And I'm sure, and they must have arranged before he went on. If you watch the interview, it was only a split second where he talked about what happened at the Academy Awards. But in that moment, you hear Brother Jackson, who of course broke what in drama they would call the third wall between the stage and the audience, when he coming up after his friend. I guess I guess he was Ron Artest at that time, Meta World Peace, or went up in the stands, because you ain't gonna just throw no ice and beer on me while I'm laying here trying to calm myself down. So Steven Jackson was like, "Yeah, I understand. It's your woman. You hold on, bro. You going off script." Will Smith can't co-sign that. Even if you think that he can't co-sign it. Why? This is not a governance conversation. All the smoke, y'all done gone from a podcast to being heavily subsidized by Showtime, meaning Viacom, meaning this broader world. So you can't just be having no governance, and you ain't no comedian. So you can't finish that punchline with "these ain't jokes" and everybody laugh. No, you ain't not a comedian. You want to be taken as a journalist of some form. But anyway, the whole point is that in that conversation, there's a glimpse where you see there's a full range of opinion. Now, if you're in a social structure formation, you're not going to hear what African people think about that. At least not African people who have a whole lot of visibility. So, LeBron James is being celebrated in part because his pushback against the media in terms of Jerry Jones' racist behavior when he was 14 years old. And I absolutely understand the observation. He was young. He was 14. And he maybe he didn't know what he was doing. You got to take him at his word. And my thing is, hey, no problem. And my response isn't, well, Emmett Till was 14. And my response isn't, Tamir Rice was younger than that. My response isn't any of that. My response is, okay, let's say he was 14. How old is he now? Because he defended the 14-year-old as an old man. So you saying that too? I mean, it's a hell of a thing when you stand between the ass whooping and your master and say, "Master, I'll take it." Because at least, for Brother Gordon Smith, them whelps on his back were from him bucking. Your welts are from being broken. Like, you gonna stand in front of this man and take this ass with it? Okay, between the 14-year-old and the old man is you defending the 14-year-old, and he ain't even doing. He defending the 14-year-old too. That's why you saw the memes with Steven from Django Unchained for these folks who are, Steven being the character in Django Unchained. But we'll stand there and defend him. But I'm saying all that to say that in all of these contexts, you have this constant tension between the way the world perceives people of African descent and the way that people of African descent perceive each other. And as the World Cup continues to unfold in Qatar, and you see the captain of the U.S. football team, U.S. national football team, a man with an African parent who was raised by Europeans in the United States of America, who, when challenged by the foreign press, particularly the Iran journalists, about any comment on the United States' terrible record, including Black Lives Matter, who are you to come over here and criticize in this country? And we're not, as John Henry Clark would often say in some stories, there ain't no good guys. So this ain't about that. But the response is, of course, to rally around the flag. And people say, well, they're very proud of him. He's receiving a lot of accolades in the white stream commercial media. And of course he would, for saying that. A lot more mixed opinion in circles of people of African descent. And that mixed opinion rarely sees the light of day in the social structure. But there are moments when the things get very close together and may begin to converge. And at that moment, society is shocked. White society, that is, shocked to find out that a lot of Black people, not all Black people, there's no anything that's all, that Black people are shocked. I mean, the social structure rather is shocked. There are Black people who feel this way. Yeah, a lot of Black people. And we're not going to come for that, brother. Why? Because we know that two things. We know even if he thinks different, he ain't going to say it. And that's number two. Number one, why would you expect him to think different? Yeah, he came out of his mother's womb and one of his parents is Black, but he wasn't raised by Black folk. He wasn't raised in the Black community. He definitely experienced being Black because he Black by your definition. But in terms of investiture of expectation, investiture of responsibility, rites of passage, initiation, none of that is coming in his life from communities of African descent. So it's not surprising at all that he would give that answer. He may believe that with his whole heart, but we're not going to respond to you because we are clear about where he is when he's being asked that question. So if you want to have a different kind of conversation, you're probably going to have to go around a community, a group of people who are just of African descent. And then you'll see that opinion expressed and the exact opposite of that opinion expressed and just about everything in between. But you'll be shocked by the fact that that happens. And you're shocked at the fact that that happens because just like those professors that told Oyewake Oyewumi, if you're studying yourself, that's an African self. So therefore, you must be an anthropologist because we consider anthropology the study of you. And even when you studying you, that's still foreign. Well, we have a definition for you of you that isn't us. And we will put that on you your whole life. And your mistake will be if you accept our definition as if it's yours and begin to look at yourself that way. That's why we have to have Africana studies to deaden the noise and step out of that social structure long enough to begin to think with each other in our full complexity. As Wade Nobles would say, power is the ability to define reality and have other people accept your definition as if it were their definition. Well, that's what we are faced with. So, on this first few days of December in the calendar year, and of course, after finishing this month, we will then go to January and resume our Roman named uh, months after Julius and Augustus Caesar put their name in the calendar and made the 10th month the 12th, putting July and August in, and now Dece 10 is the 12th. Now that we are in the first few days of that, we can look at some coordinates on this Saturday that help us kind of stimulate ourselves to think about our obligations to each other, our obligations to each other as people of African descent, our obligations to the world beyond. And thinking about that in the context of, for example, here in the United States, in the state of Georgia, a state where the film Emancipation was scheduled. I think Antoine Fuqua is the director, right? I think he's the director. It's funny how Europeans find a story that they become fascinated by. Another reason why I wanted to get this handbook, because the Palgrave Handbook of African Traditional Religion is written by Africans, not just continental Africans, diasporic Africans, Africans all over the world. There are 46 chapters in here, 630 pages, not including the index. By the time you get through with the index and the footnotes, it goes longer than that. But these are almost exclusively people of African descent, writing about Africana ways of knowing, what may be called tradition, religion, right? Writing about, thinking about everything from um, sustainable social and economic dynamics to conflict resolution to concepts of the circle of life, burial rites, afterlife, reincarnation, leadership, women, societies of secrets, oral and non-oral knowledges, metaphysical concepts, concepts of worship, and many other topics. This to reinforce the many various other um, things that have been written and spoken on the subject. And as I said earlier, and I didn't finish this thought, so let me tie this up now. None of that scholarship, none of these books, none of these texts are a substitute for the literal practice. So many folk who are initiated in Africana spiritual traditions, and I would include in the broader valence of Africana spiritual traditions, not just the ones that we automatically identify as quote unquote African, whether it be Vodun, whether it be Ifa, whether it be the Akan traditions, any of those labels, and really that's all they are, labels. I'm looking at the extensions of Africana ways of knowing and practice that come into the Africanization of everything from quote unquote the major so-called Western traditions, although none of them were born in Europe. And that, of course, would be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the African versions of that. So I would extend that circle to include Santeria, Candomblé, the Holiness, the Shango Baptists in Trinidad and Tobago. If you've got a practice among African people that shows the extension of Africana ways of knowing, then I would include that in the constellation of spiritual practices, of ways of knowing that could be called Africana spiritual practices. I would include those in there. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't, and I absolutely understand that. And again, that's why we have our conversations. That's why we're having this class we're having now, as we bring ourselves, we all, as you say, Prof, bring our brick. But in that process, on this first weekend of December, we think about the fact that, you know, we are engaged in a perpetual act of we formation. And in that we formation, that community formation, there is no natural we that we must not tend to and sustain. We are constantly asking ourselves, who are we? Who are we to each other? How do we move through the world collectively? What are our responsibilities? How do we learn those responsibilities? Because we know education, a major component of education is socialization. What are our responsibilities? So here in the United States, in the state of Georgia, there's an election going on. Millions of people have already voted, early voting, even as the white nationalists of Georgia tried desperately to kick the teeth out of last weekend for early voting. And one of the reasons I'm sure they tried and failed to do that was that a lot of young people were at home for the holiday break here in the United States. And I have a lot of students at Howard who were from Georgia who voted last weekend and then got on the bus, got on the plane, rode back to DC. Oh, yeah. See, that Saturday was very important. That's very important. Why? Because that was the day that they stayed at home, and then one of the things they did was vote. Then they came on back to school, and that happened all over the United States. The Georgia students, were at home, many of them, and they voted. And now, of course, Georgia is also a state where when they passed those voting laws to restrict people from participating in the franchise, which is not a revolutionary act and is a revolutionary act at the same time. There's no label called revolutionary, and these are the only things that fit as revolutionary. It's a tool and a strategy, as we said many times in the larger process. But even as in the state of Georgia, the white nationalist party attempted to kick the teeth out of so many things. Can't give water to people in line. You restrict the number of drop boxes. You you cut in half the number of voting days, which is why you have those long lines. It creates a funnel effect because now you haven't stretched it out over a longer period. You've shortened the period, which means people got to stand there. Now you got an hour and a half wait, 2 hour wait, 3 hour wait, 4 hour wait. People not getting out of line. Meanwhile, the hillbilly horde is off in Podunk, Georgia, where there are 4 living beings, three of them being dogs and one person who lives in town, who then walk to their well-appointed voting place, and there's no line at all. They stick their little dagger in our common humanity and go on home to resume watching Fox News. That's all by design. But when they passed those laws, something interesting happened, even as it relates to this film. Emancipation is coming out. Fuqua, the producers, Will Smith, they decided that they would pull those elements of the movie they were going to shoot in Georgia. They would pull Georgia from the shooting schedule. Now that's taking money out of the mouths of the folk that work at Tyler Perry Studios, the black folk who drive the cars, who cater the meals, the black folk who, do all the various Sunday things that make up movie making, which is why you got to have this multi-million-dollar budget. Will Smith is reported to have made $35 million from this movie. And then, of course, that's just his salary. I mean, but there are people who work at minimum wage who work and then they didn't have this shoot to schedule. Well, because the question becomes, what do you do? In a governance formation, there's going to be a real debate about that. Because on the one hand, let's say on the one hand, on the other hand, and for one example, you have Ryan Coogler now who shoot part of Wakanda Forever in Georgia. Remember, Ryan Coogler got accosted by the police, most of whom look like him, of African descent, because somebody in the bank, including people who look like him, called the police on him because he went out there, he went to the bank and withdrew some money, like money, as we were saying, Ebonics, which I'll talk about in a minute in the context of this question of language and who we are. But he gets accosted, but he's only in Georgia because he's working, because the movie that everybody going out to see now, Wakanda Forever, part of it was shot there. And on the, in the other dimension, you have Fuqua and Smith and them who say, yeah, we pulling Emancipation from Georgia because of these white nationalists who are trying to destroy our ability to use this one tool in our broader liberation struggle as a tool of self-defense and harm reduction, voting. And here we are on a weekend where yesterday was the last day to early vote, and millions of people have voted anyway. As Frank Smith, the SNCC veteran who runs the United States Civil War Museum, Black Civil War, African American Civil War Museum here in D.C., as his brother told him, because Frank is from down there, Frank from Georgia, he said, now you stay up there, you handle your business up there. We know we've been dealing with these white people a long time in Georgia. We're going to handle that. So should Emancipation have pulled Georgia from its shooting schedule, only to go to where the real life Gordon escaped, Louisiana, which ain't no better to shoot? Well, that's a debate. That's a governance debate, particularly when you look at the past couple of election cycles, and see that the participation of people of African descent who are registered and can vote in the United States federal elections and midterm elections and presidential cycles elections actually decreased this last election, 2022. The numbers decreased of black voters in North Carolina, in Georgia, and in Louisiana. So even with the new restrictions in place, you would think people might meet the challenge and say, I'm gonna vote anyway. Well, the numbers went down. Did they go down because of apathy? Did they go down because of voter suppression? Both those elements and more. But the fact of the matter is that there is no one way of thinking about we, but in this process of we making that leads us to these debates, to these conversations, commingled with social structure forces who have their own agenda, which is absolutely not our agenda. We're going to come to that too. We're here on this first weekend of December and reminded that we have many tools to think together, to build we together, to construct ways of moving through the world in time and space and engaging these social structures we find ourselves in together. Because doing it together enhances our capacity to protect ourselves, to reduce harm to ourselves, more importantly, to build new worlds for ourselves, and in building new worlds for ourselves, helping in some ways create a wehemi mesu, a repetition of the birth, a repetition of the essential forms of being together, many of which are being discussed in this book, as in many others, as spiritual tradition book, to enhance our experience as human beings, and also to help us live more beautifully in the world, in the place that we inhabit, in the reality we are aware of. All these things fit together. So here we are in this first weekend of December. We've been in this formation week after week. The blessing of having this metronome. We've been in this session week after week at the height of a pandemic, in the endemic phase of a pandemic, in a core conversation which has now taken deep root, manifest itself in a true maroon space like narrative in Nubia, where we continue to build and grow. And no matter what the social structure does, Twitter, is it collapsing? Is it not collapsing? Oh, man, social media is collapsing. People getting counted, canceled, not canceled. None of that. We are here. We're with each other. And for 2 Decembers now, preceding this one, we, around this cluster of days, December 1st, 2nd, 3rd, have taken moments in our collective experience to note, for example, John Brown, who was executed 1859, December the 2nd. And of course, John Brown here in the United States, attempting to convene a we that transcended even race. He wasn't attempting to overthrow the United States government. He was attempting, as we talked about extensively. You can go back in the narrative archives, and we won't do it today. I'm just evoking it to give us remind us of the momentum of memory of how we're building. That John Brown was not trying to overthrow the government as much as he was saying, we're going to create free space. We're going to do it collectively. We're going to go into the mountains. And from there, we'll continue to recruit people into those maroon spaces. That looks very much like the Maroons of the Caribbean and of Latin America. It looks like the Maroons of the Great Dismal Swamp, which is why, no doubt, Martin Robeson Delaney, with his serialized novel Blake, writes about Africans escaping into these spaces. Martin Delaney, who, as we talked about extensively, writes Frances Rolland, in her biography of Delaney, and Delaney himself. This is Larry Crow, by the way. We were talking earlier this week. Larry may be here now. He and Mama Olabisi were in Wilberforce, Ohio, at the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center, and they nailed, among other things, down the date for the Martin Delaney ceremony that we have Memorial Day weekend in Ohio. He's been doing that, and the folk out of Chicago and Dayton and the whole Midwest have been doing that for many years. So, our lips to God is God's ears, or as the Muslims would say, inshallah, we'll be there in Memorial Day weekend, and we'll be doing in class from there, from the National Museum of Afro-American History and Culture in Wilberforce. So, as Larry has spoken about and written about, and so many others, Anderson Thompson, Harold Pates, Conrad Worrell, Jacob Carruthers, so many others, Ife Carruthers, Rosetta Cash, Yvonne Jones. Just thinking about Noel Gardner, who, by the way, sent me this beautiful shirt. I always rock this is the African Festival of the Arts in Chicago. This is I think the 29th annual shirt. Noel works that festival, but as all those Africans in the Midwest have done for many years. Bing Davis, I started naming them. I'll forget somebody, or I won't name somebody. But we'll be there Memorial Day weekend for the Martin Delaney 2023, that is. But as Martin Delaney, who knew John Brown, who corresponded with John Brown, who met with John Brown in Canada when they formed, among other things, a kind of a small convention to draft a new constitution for a new country. Brown, of course, coming back to the United States and losing his life, executed on December the 2nd, 1859. Harriet Tubman, who was supposed to be with John Brown. I'm looking, I don't know if I have it somewhere near me. No, I don't think I do. My man Clarence Luzane, my brother Clarence Luzane, who, well, maybe it's here. If it is, I'll pull it out. If it's not, I'll just have to give you the title without being able to show you the book. No, it's not in there. Oh, that's too bad. Clarence Luzane, who wrote a book called $20 and Change. $20 and Change, which is a book on Harriet Tubman and what she means. Clarence is my colleague at Howard University in the political science department. But at any rate, Tubman and Brown were friends. And he writes about that relationship. Harriet Tubman, very spiritual person. But, that happened December the 2nd, 1859. And we've talked about that extensively. Tomorrow, some of y'all be watching that tomorrow, which would mean today for you, on, of course, December the 4th, 1969. Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, 21 and 22 years old, respectively, assassinated by Chicago patrol rollers. in a coordinated effort between the federal government, the state of Illinois, and the city of Chicago. Murderers murdered those brothers. And of course, shout out to Mom and Jerry, his partner, their son, Fred Hampton Jr., Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., still on the wall, still struggling. This is the weekend where we pause to remember that. And there's so many other things that we could talk about. But in that context of these points of entry for us to think about who we are, how we then use that we to expand and fight, whether it be Africans in the United States in an election cycle for the United States Senate that might give the Democratic Party one more vote in the federal legislature and in the Senate side. And that's not because black people love the Democratic Party so much, using it as a battering ram for harm reduction, because one more seat uh, may mean that people might get their insulin price lowered. But the white nationalists are going to fight, because there are other white nationalists like the self-labeled white Christian nationalists, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who will be in the majority in the House of Representatives. So look out for some real Klan stuff over the next 2 years in the House of Representatives. But that extra seat will mean easier judicial appointments. It takes Joe Manchin out of play, the soft white nationalist out of West Virginia, who continues to work against the interests of the people who vote for him. You saw the Amtrak. If you're living in the United States, not Amtrak, the railroads writ large, the railroad unions fighting with the owners of the railroads to try to get a better deal for the women and men who work the railroads in this country. So it isn't just passenger railroads. It's the people who make sure that there is food in the grocery stores, that you can order something on these convenient cyber platforms and it's delivered to your door. Stuff comes on trains. If it's shipped into a port in the Bay Area or a port in New York and Newark area, it gets on a train. Those aren't the trains you ride. Those are the trains that keep everything moving, and lifeblood between that and the trucks. And those people have unions, and those unions had negotiated with these owners for a little bit of room to operate. And the federal government intervened because it's Christmas time and everybody gonna spend all their damn money. Black Friday and Cyber Monday and so forth and so on. And of course, I hope some of you all gave narrative as a gift in this giving season, the season of Kwanzaa. I think there's some other rituals that take place during this season, but anyway, Kwanzaa is the first one that comes to mind. In an act of self-determination, Kujichagulia. But in that process, they want the trains to run. So the Biden administration been negotiating, pushing on these unions, pushing on these owners behind the scenes, and then they finally got to the point where they're like, "Y'all gonna strike? Oh hell no! You got to come to work. Shit, you got to come to work." So they intervened. Again, the illusion somehow that power can't do whatever the hell it wants to do unless somebody stops it. Who gonna check them, boo? They intervened because they have that ability legally. And they said, you have to settle now. You got to accept the contract that the unions negotiated with the owners. But there was one piece, not perfect, not all, but something that the unions wanted that the owners was like, we ain't giving y'all that. And that was simply 1 week, 7 days, 1 week of paid leave for the workers who work the railroads in all the capacities. In order to get the major bill accepting the negotiated contract passed into the desk of the President of the United States, the union had to accept that the demand for 7 days of paid leave be introduced as a bill, as a separate piece of legislation. Well, it passed the House of Representatives, the United States House, where the Democrats voted for it and the white nationalists voted against it. I'm talking about the open white nationalists. The white nationalists in the Democratic Party too. See Joe Manchin, because when it came to the Senate side, it failed. 52. 52-47, because there were some people who didn't vote at all. Look at that, cowards. Or for whatever reason. Let me not say that, because I'm not going to attribute that, because I haven't researched to find out. Sometimes people sick, they can't travel, whatever. You can't proxy vote, so you know. But among those who voted no, among those who voted yes, were some avowed white nationalists, like young Josh Hawley out of Missouri, Rafael Cruz out of Texas, Lil Marco Rubio out of Florida. Voted yes, give them the leave. On the no side, the whole white nationalist party, except about 6 white nationalists who broke ranks, and Joe Manchin. Well, that 51st seat will render Manchin much less effective in his soft white nationalism destruction. And I'm sure his response would be, I don't give a damn. Or I don't give a damn, or I don't give a damn, because I know he picks up after himself on his yacht, this part down here in the harbor uh, in DC. I'm sure there's nobody who cleans that yacht for him, and I'm sure he does all his cooking in it, because he was born a coal miner, so I know he does it all for himself. Not, but I mean, I'm sure his response would be, I don't give a damn. And then maybe somewhere 50th or 100th or 1,000 down the line, his response would be, well, if I would have voted for that, then the people will vote me out in West Virginia. These are the same damn poor people who used to swear by the Union in West Virginia. And who knows? And maybe if Raphael Warnock wins, Joe Manchin will finally do what we all know he should go on and do, and declare himself as a full-fledged card-carrying member of the White Nationalist Party. That leaves Kristen Sinema, who's shaking in her boots, because it may be Ruben Gallego, somebody else in Arizona. She's probably gonna get primaried. Now I'm gonna end with this, because this ain't really about politics this morning. I'm just putting in the context how the we, when we come together and move, kind of pushes back against the social structure and gives us perhaps a little bit more room to operate on this weekend, when we think about the fact that in this early voting cycle in Georgia, that we are constantly reminded by these historical events, whether it be the killing of John Brown, the killing of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton, that power will always do what is necessary to maintain itself. In the case of John Brown, we understand, maybe I like slavery, maybe I don't like slavery, but what you're not going to do is disrupt this social structure. And you're a white man, so we're gonna put you to death, along with a couple of these Negroes that were with you. A couple of your sons lived their life out there at Harper's Ferry. In 1969, y'all want to feed black people and give them health care and sickle cell testing and free breakfast for their children and liberation schools for their children. And yeah, nah, because we also hear you talking about guns. Now we don't see you talking about guns to hunt people, but we don't care. You got a gun and we got guns, and you can't just have guns. So we just gonna start killing you. We'll just start killing you if you get too effective. We'll just take you out. But then there were many Panther Cubs, one of which, of course, my dear friend and brother Sharif El Mekki in Philadelphia, whose parents were Panthers in the Philly chapter, along with then Wesley Cook, now Mumia Abu Jamal, so many others. Baba Matulu Shakur has made it out of his extended incarceration. The state wanted to give him a death sentence. See, there are two ways of doing a death penalty. You convict somebody, you kill them then, or after their appeals run out, or you give them life, the slow death penalty. And Baba Matulu got out, godfather, of course, of Tupac Shakur, whose mother, Afeni, was involved in that whole Panther formation. I mean, these are the Panthers, but they had Cubs, and the Cubs are still around today fighting that good fight. So on this weekend, we remind ourselves of Clark and Hampton. And the we formation finally brings me to, on the 22nd anniversary, December the 3rd, of the day that Gwendolyn Brooks, the great poet, born in Topeka, Kansas, but best known in Chicago, made transition. I pulled a few copies of my prized copies of Black World. Here's Gwendolyn Brooks. When we talked about Gwendolyn Brooks many times, there she is in an excerpt from her book, Report from Part 1, the autobiography of Gwendolyn Brooks. She eventually published subsequent volumes. This is September 1972 edition of Black World. And if you want to read all the Black Worlds and Negro Digests, which we've talked about, so that it can help you imagine, as Hoyt Fuller would say, imagine the unimaginable, as Hoyt Fuller, the man himself. You can read them on Google Books. All of them are available from when it was Negro Digest back in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, all the way through 1975, when it's transformed by then into Black World. But, this is the anniversary of Gwen Brooks' transition in the year 2000 was 2022, December the 3rd, 2022, marks 22 years. Gwen Brooks, who I'm evoking her because I want to put her in conversation for a moment today with her friend, Margaret Walker Alexander, another Titan poetess. And I want to put that in the conversation as we're thinking about we and how we make. And I'll pause here to set this in a very specific context we're dealing with today. Gwendolyn Brooks worked most of her life in and around Black institutions. Institutions are important because institutions allow the we to engender and extend the we. Young people born in institutional formations, whether it be family and community, receive training and expectations, receive training in investments, receive training in terms of being then brought and cultivated into a set of responsibilities, first to community. So the young brother who's the captain of the United States football team, soccer team at the World Cup, you wouldn't expect him to articulate something that spoke to a we as people of African descent, even as the poet David Job says, Africa, my Africa, though I've never seen you, my face is full of your blood. Even though his face is full of the blood of Africa, as far as the social structure is concerned, you look a certain way, therefore we project onto you certain expectations. Domestic anthropology, to repurpose what these white boys told Oyewake Oyewumi. If you're studying yourself is an other to us, so therefore you must be an anthropologist, not a sociologist. What do you do with the Africans of the United States who are theoretically Americans? Well, when we study y'all, it's not y'all, not us, so we can't say anthropology because you are domestic, but it's kind of a form of domestic otherness because you ain't really us. So when we studying y'all, we looking at black stuff, this kind of thing. But if you are engendered in a governance formation, in a family structure, in a structure which has certain expectations, then there are certain expectations made of you, and you go through certain rites of passage. Gwen Brooks went through those rites of passage. Her friend Margaret Walker Alexander went through those rites of passage. Fred Hampton went through those rites of passage in Maywood, as we talked about over and over again when we went through the life of Fred Hampton. You are engendered through community. Sharif El-Mekki went through those rites of passage. We went through those rites of passage. We went through those expectations. Here's somebody else that went through those expectations. A brother who was, right in our age group, Professor Hunter, I think he's 55, who very soon may, in fact, maybe today, tomorrow, because right now in Jackson, Mississippi, the Southwest Athletic Conference is having its championship game. Southern University Jaguars, fresh off their victory at the Bayou Classic last week over Grambling State University, is facing the Jackson State University Tigers, coached by Deion Sanders, who came out of black communities. Right? Well, in order to stop a whole-scale slave rebellion, not an imaginary one like the one Chris Rock was playing around that he was going to lead in the movie in Top 5, or even a movie like Will Smith, who is not talking about a rebellion of a bunch of Africans, but one African trying to escape and build back and get back to his community, who then uses the Union Army to advance his interests, and even when recaptured, escapes again. No, we're talking about Deion Sanders and an entire U.S. slave economy based on the exploitation of African labor, not slavery with the whips where they put it on your back, slavery in terms of mental slavery. In fact, what it on the back of this issue of Black World with Gwendolyn Brooks, they would put these little vignettes on the back. Said there are a few things more unforgivable than when men knowingly betray themselves. And he writes about, he's writing about this. During the deepening mood of rebellion that characterized the Black 60s, a new generation learned an ancient lesson that power makes concessions only when challenged by counterpower. Those bright-eyed idealists who began by singing black and white together and we shall overcome ended with the sober recognition that in a racist society, black and white will touch only tangentially. Again, those comedians. Their togetherness, a pathetic defiance of a pattern as rigid and as immutable as death. And what was overcome was little more than their innocence, the cold realization that all the flowery and thrilling talk about freedom and justice and equality criminally has meant only in the Disneyland atmosphere of high school civics classes. Right. While they fighting, while Jerry Jones and his friends don't want the curriculum to reflect the reality. Because, see, you could swap out that picture of the Little Rock Nine going into Central High School and put in the picture of Jerry Jones and his friends at North Central High School when the Africans are trying to get up in there. And Jerry Jones, I was just there to watch. Okay, but between the building and these children, between the world and me is you. Now I know you're gonna have a few Negroes come down there and try to turn their back and take a few whips for you, and they getting whipped, except that whip ain't in the hand of white people. That whip is in the hand of black people. You seeing a little governance conversation going on now in the black community for those who would defend their master because they love their master. But at any rate, you can't put that picture of Jerry Jones in the textbooks. They don't want the picture of Little Rock Nine in there because part of the way that you create an imaginary we in this country called United States of America is what I would call the violence of erasure. We start today. We love you. Really? Why do you love me? We love you because you make money for us. You work for us. You entertain us. And so, Hoyt Fuller writes, he says the Black consciousness movement was born of this stark reality. If racism savaged the nation's soul, then the psychological survival of those singled out as victims demanded that they first clearly identify their enemies and then systematically act, not individuals, systematically act to gain the power and unity with which to confront and ultimately to defeat their enemies. We'll go on, but this kind of stuff is all through Black World Negro Digest. Y'all go look at these. So, before they disappear, because I'm trying to figure out who got the intellectual property. I'm gonna say less. Because I always believe that, this technology is a luxury. In fact, let me just read something from Gwen Brooks in a little pamphlet she published called, Third World Press published called Very Young Poets, Gwendolyn Brooks. This is a message, an introduction to children who want to write poetry. She gives them a love letter in 1983. This is what she says about technology. It's called Computer. She wrote a little poem called Computer. Y'all see Computer? She says, a computer is a machine. A machine is interesting. A machine is useful. I can study a computer. I can use it. We're doing it now. Who made it? Gwen Brooks writes. Human beings made it. She says, I am a human being. I am warm. I am wise. I have empathies for animals and people. I conduct a computer. A computer does not conduct me. So, one of the reasons I like to be able to pull that is when they turn off the lights on everything, then, I just wait till the sun come up and keep reading. Why? Because I got the physical book, including all the Black Worlds, and Negro Digest. So if we ever lose access to that stuff electronically, you probably want a few of us to have the physical copy so we can have a Waheme Mesu at some point when we seize back control of the technology, if it ever comes back. But that having been said, Gwendolyn Brooks, Margaret Walker, working in Black institutional formations. In governance formations we control, we can build the kind of power that would allow us to push back and not only extend ourselves, but help transform the world. And so I want to think about that on this weekend when it may be announced. I don't know, probably. I'm not trying to be a prophet. And frankly, I don't care, which is really where I'm going with this. I don't care as much as people might think we should care. The concern of people who have exploited Black labor since the beginning of our sojourn in this hemisphere, we want to continue to exploit Black labor. So Jerry Jones, who as a teenage boy is like, what these Black people doing trying to get over here? I'm going to stand between them and the building because I'm just curious. And Jerry Jones of 2022, that's like, yeah, we had to put down a whole slave rebellion during that George Floyd mess. So I got on my knees in my $1 billion stadium too. Long as these Negroes keep coming here play for me. And I buy and sell bodies. I don't care the color of the bodies, but the Black ones seem to be a little bit more valuable, which is why ain't nobody asked LeBron James. And he said, why ain't y'all ask me about the Jerry Jones thing? But I'm wondering when they going to ask one of the most valuable employees that Jerry Jones dealt for a whole damn team, which gave him the only Super Bowl rings he has. I wonder why ain't nobody asked Herschel Walker. Y'all remember that, right? Herschel Walker worked for Donald Trump and Jerry Jones, didn't he? Prof, I'm trying to remember.
Yes, the U.S. generals,
Right.
yes,
New Jersey Generals.
yes,
And the Dallas Cowboys. In fact, he was damn near the only valuable asset. What was it, Minnesota? I forget, what did they trade Walker to and got half the damn team? They was going to get rid of Michael Irvin, I think. But they kept Michael Irvin. And that left the dog and DAWG from Georgia. And looked up and it was doggone. Doggone. And they got back all them picks and they got about, and they turned that into all
18 players and draft picks, and it also involved the San Diego Chargers.
Wait a minute, Prof. Wait a minute. Come back on screen because I'm sure I misunderstood. I didn't see your mouth moving when you said how many?
18.
Stop playing.
18 players
Herschel Walker got traded for 18 people
and draft picks. And draft picks.
Does it say who some of those players were or who
Hold
the picks
on.
turned into?
Let me
I know it's some Cowboys fans in here who gonna be mad when they hear these names.
okay.
Maybe my memory, because I don't really, auction blocks never really appealed to me that much, even when I was cheering for one side or another, the plantation.
The Vikings, there was to the Cowboys, Jesse Solomon, David Howard, Isaac Holt, Alex Stewart.
It was the picks. What the picks become? Does it say?
The first round? No, I would have to do a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the picks turned into like Troy.
Turned into Emmett Smith.
What?
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness, hold on. It's the 6th round pick turned into Stan Smog. I don't know who that one
Yeah,
is.
he didn't make it.
Alonzo Highsmith. Highsmith.
Oh,
Darren Woodson.
Oh, Darren Woodson, cornerback.
Kevin Smith turned into Clayton Holmes, one of the picks. All of these picks. Oh my goodness.
No, that's
the big one, Emmett Smith. I mean,
So you basically traded Emmett Smith for Emmett Smith, and you got Charles Wilson, and you got Highsmith. One dude, but he ain't been. Has anybody? Maybe I missed it because I really ain't been paying. Did anybody ask Herschel Walker about his former boss?
If I'm being honest, I can't. After there's just so much. Dr. Carr. I'm not even. True. Werewolves and vampires and the erections and all of that. I can't do but so much of that.
Look, hey y'all, if you were not fortunate enough to be among the 300 or plus who were all together on the live Foolishness Fridays here in DC a couple of weeks ago when Professor Hunter and Lamont King and them did that, when you did that interview with Herschel Walker, then you missed gold. You just had to listen to the recording because it's too much. It's too much. You can't clown a clown. But on the football field, that man very valuable. You basically traded him for your Super Bowls. But ain't nobody asking, because if they asked him, he probably just say, Jerry Jones, I think I see Jerry Jones in there, man. Jerry Jones. But anyway, I'm not even gonna try because I mean,
don't do it. Don't do it.
I'm not. That's it's fet. That's the Egyptians. It's fet. In other words, in the Egyptian world sense, the worldview, way of knowing, there is no such thing as good and evil that are of equal power. What you have is the universe, reality, which is always in divine order, what they would call ma'at. So, however, what you have is momentary appearances of interruption in divine order, which they may call isfet, which is why in English they would translate that to chaos. Yes, because at the core of Western worldviews, you have the notion of chaos. The Greek mythology, the Roman mythology. I mean, they get these chaos agents, right? But that's illusory because every action has a reaction. The concept of ma'at can't be reduced to any one label: truth, balance, reciprocity, order. It really is an attempt. The Egyptians are doing an attempt. These ancient Africans are giving an attempt to say that everything moves in a pattern and in an order. So even when you do dirt can come back to you. And we know that continues in our way of knowing. But yeah, trying to mimic Herschel Walker at this moment when we're making a much more important, in fact, the points would introduce a moment of isfet, and it would take a moment to reset into the order. So let's continue with the order. You're absolutely right. So on this weekend, we got this election going, and this weekend, which marks the anniversary of deaths and assassinations and things which are the attempt to impose power, we may very well hear sometime today or tomorrow or early next week, sometime between the SWAC champion, whoever wins the Southwestern Athletic Conference, and the odds are it will be Jackson State, although there's a lot of Southern fans. I ain't mad at y'all, and I really don't have a dog in this fight because all black colleges meet the MEAC champion, the Mid-Eastern Atlantic Conference champion, North Carolina Central, in Atlanta 2 weeks from this Saturday at the Celebration Bowl, the HBCU National Championships. And it's gonna be a time. What a time, what a time. As Redwood Jr. said, we ain't worried about America. We worried about where the party at. Where the party 2 weeks from today is going to be in Atlanta at the Celebration Bowl. It's gonna be where one of the parties is at. Right. So whether that's Deion Sanders' team, Jackson State, or whether it's the Southern University Jaguars, it's going to be one of them two teams. They playing today to settle that, and maybe today, tomorrow, sometime between now and then, there may be an announcement that Deion Sanders has been bought. And just like Herschel Walker got traded for 18 papers, the whole white players, the whole white world in athletics, determined to put down a slave rebellion, not a Chris Rock imaginary top 5 slave rebellion, not a Will Smith escape slave rebellion in Emancipation, but a real life slave rebellion in Jackson, Mississippi. Their plans to squelch that will have been executed. To the tune.
So the story is out, right?
Is it?
Yeah, Colorado State is offering him $5 million a year. Colorado.
Yeah, Boulder.
Colorado. I'm struggling with this. And I feel like we don't sit in the soil long enough to take root. And, and I think about bamboo, and I'm writing some things. So, bamboo, it takes about 5 years for the root system to, spread out. But once it does, you can't really kill bamboo. Like bamboo is like, I'm gonna pop up here, I'm gonna pop up there. You can cut me down here. I'm gonna show up a mile away because the root system is so deep. And I feel like we don't stay in long enough to build and develop that root system that is unstoppable. And it was like a couple more years, just 2 more years. And I get it. The resources are horrible. There's bad water. There's all of these things. But if one person can withstand all of that, it was this man. It's this man. And the goal, yes, and in your mind, because this is the lie we tell ourselves, all of us, right? All of us who at some point leave an HBCU to go to another school, we're going to set and frame Blackness, and we're going to come and we're going to bring all of the people along with us because we really believe that, right? That we're going to do good with this money. This money can do good. But what is ripped up before it's able to take root can't be replaced.
No.
That $5 million a year, I don't know. I mean, I just
when you say it can't be replaced, you mean when you say that, help us say a little bit more about it.
I'm saying that you've stopped the progress of something that didn't really get a chance to become unstoppable. And then you're going over there and the $5 million a year, you're going to give resources and opportunities, I'm sure, to a whole host of Black children who are going to get their skulls banged in together and, have CTE later and be studied.
How about that?
But at what cost? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and we'll never know. So because it didn't take root, and what he left behind, the legacy, maybe there'll be some things in Jackson that will happen as a result. Or maybe there's a deal. If I go here, then you have to double the amount of money that's left back for Jack. I don't know, but I just feel like, damn.
Well, let's using the powerful metaphor of the bamboo plant that you just laid out. What is planted at Jackson State? What did Deion Sanders plant there?
Pride.
So in other words, they weren't proud at Jackson State before Deion Sanders.
I mean, the Jackson State folk were proud. Yeah, I've been there. I mean, one of the baddest. It's one of the most amazing campuses I've ever been on. The most powerful campuses I've ever. When I did my HBCU tour, I went to Howard and I went to Morehouse and Spelman. Well, when I got to Jackson, those young people were lit. Yes, it was special.
That's right. So he didn't plant pride.
Okay, you're right.
He brought awareness to the pride that was there, and in his sons and in the young brother he took from Florida State, he threatened to weaponize that pride differently. But if Jackson State went 0-11 every year, and I say this as a proud former member of the Tennessee State University Aristocratic Bands, we're going to beef with the sonic boom of the South until the end of the earth. And it's going to be pride on both sides. Deion Sanders ass can go dance up and down up there. You can do whatever hell you want, bro. But the bamboo is the institution, not the individual. What now? So I'm saying that I'm saying it to raise this question because I, like you, we're all kind of trying, what did Deion Sanders bring that they didn't have before?
possibility, the fear that every HBCU could take on Alabama, Michigan, all Penn State, all of these biggies now. These young people have options, and the options mean that I could play in places where I'm seen, felt, heard. Teachers gonna come check on me, make sure where I'm loved, where I'm validated, and I'm not just some workhorse or some person in bondage that's getting a scholarship and maybe some NIL money or whatever. But like, I can actually bring these championships, these world championships, these national championships to these schools because it's the talent. It's us. It's
Let's play that
us.
out. Let's play that. Let's
Okay.
play that out. Let's play that out for a minute. Let's say he not only stays, but he stays for 10 years. Let's say he makes it a career. How long before HBCUs are playing Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan for the national championship, do you think?
2 years.
What would it require? Because they're all in FCS at this point.
Right.
What would it require for them to play? What would it require for Grambling, Jackson State, FAM, Bethune-Cookman, any of those schools, Tennessee State, to play Ohio State for the national championship? Because all the schools I mentioned, the HBCUs are in FCS. What would it take? I mean, logistically, not even logistically, structurally.
Okay. Structurally,
if Deion Sanders, Jackson State keeps going 11-0, wins everything, don't never. At what point? What would Jackson State have to do structurally to line up?
Already started. I mean, facilities were one thing, right? To
Okay,
provide.
so you got to have huge stadium, right?
Huge stadiums, the facilities, the locker room, the coaching, the training. Bringing in more coaches because they have more coaches,
right? Which some people are saying is a problem. You said Deion Sanders may be able to turn down $5 to $7 million, but they're gonna pay his assistant coaches, and
right. They were gonna poach.
Yeah,
is that what we call it?
Yeah. But here, let me introduce this. You may remember this. This was about almost 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more. L.C. Cole and his brother, and they got in all kind of trouble because we can't do what white people do. So, and parenthetically, I'm looking at these stories now that are saying, well, Colorado, are they taking a chance? Because remember that prime time academy. See, this wasn't a problem when you're working with the Negroes, but now you're gonna deal with the white boys. You got to be.
That's the other thing. That's the other thing.
Yeah. Oh no, he's not gonna succeed. But I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. And I hate to say that. I'm not putting a bad reputation. I'm saying, son, you got to look at history. Oh no, not son. We the same age, brother. You got to look at history. But anyway, I know you think you've learned to look at history, but let me be very clear. Looking at history don't mean just saying just interviews talking about we got to understand our history. Yeah, that's what you say. But if you understand how this cycle works, if you don't go undefeated in the next 2 or 3 years, they're gonna put that. It's like them chains around your neck, them gold chains. They're gonna drape this around your neck. It's called the Prime Time Academy. They're gonna have some, and then they're gonna say, well, you're a good recruiter, but you ain't no coach. You're not that smart. You're like a Herschel Walker. Walk up and down. In other words, it's coming, brother. It's coming. I'm saying in the words of Big Daddy Kane, I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm coming. Here I am. R.A.W. A terrorist here to bring trouble to. In other words, so Deion, we know where this story goes, but here's the thing. Do they have to, they meaning the NC2A and its member institutions, this criminal enterprise, this $1 billion criminal enterprise, do they have to accept if with the facilities, with the infrastructure, an HBCU makes the leap to the larger division? We saw it in Alabama at Alabama State University, which has a huge stadium. L.C. Cole and them boys who were at Tennessee State first. Then they went to Alabama State because Alabama State announced, the president, the board of trustees, they announced they're going to be the first HBCU to go Division I. So they got the stadium. Now ain't no Deion Sanders walking up down the sidelines. Ain't no Eddie George. Ain't no Hugh Jackson at Grambling, Eddie George, Tennessee State. There's no Deion Sanders leading the charge, leading the parade. There is the move for the infrastructure. That's Alabama State. Then the story started coming out because Alabama State was winning big. You remember that? I don't know if you remember that, Pri. Recruiting violations. Oh no. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if Deion Sanders stayed at Jackson State and they got up to warp speed, which isn't just about the size of your stadium, but you know better than I do all the things that are involved in that. You think perhaps some of them stories that they now beginning to whisper to set it up so that if he don't win all the games in the world at Colorado, they can drape this around his neck? You think those stories might find their way to Jackson State, Professor?
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's
Which
right.
is, which is why when we
Come on
first
now.
started talking, I was saying that, we can't. I remember a friend of mine whose daddy is a pastor, and he went to Lincoln, and it was like this big time NFL player, and he was like, "How does he get away with these things?" And we were having this conversation, about all of the nefarious things this brother was doing, and and then he arrived at this, we can't do what other people do,
No.
you know,
And
and
shouldn't want to, but we certainly can't, whether we want to or not.
right, right. Because there's something corruptible. Like they'll let you do things if you are operating in the system that allows them to continue to profit.
That's exactly
But
right.
if you are somebody that is due north and you very much are going to go back and Sankofa this thing,
Yes.
there's going to be a problem. If you try to even, well, so and so, you can never, well, so and so, well, they,
Can't.
we're in that so and so right now. Amazon could keep the video up. Kyrie got to pay a fine and apologize.
Right.
Amazon CEO is like, it's making money and
Right.
free speech,
Right.
and you can't touch me. Okay, so we live by different rules, right? So if
Right.
that's the case, you can keep banging against it, but why? Again, to your point, why do you want to? If he has done things, which he probably has,
Sure.
uh,
Oh
some
no, we absolutely know he has.
somebody's keeping notes, and you're right, it will come back, and it's going to absolutely take him out.
No question. But since
Mhm.
he's not the bamboo, but
Yeah.
the illusion of bamboo is
No.
okay. The bamboo is the institution. See,
Okay.
these white boys think they want him because they think a bunch of black boys gonna follow him, and they will. But here's the problem. You said it at the beginning. His sons, uh, this kid Travis, every player on that team walks into a classroom where faculty are like, I don't care whether you play football, handball, toe ball. My investment is in you. You see, you're part of a we now. And so there's an initiation I'm going to undertake you in because there are expectations that your mom and them had when you came here. And unlike Nick Saban, the slave master coach at Tuscaloosa, who will say anything to a black mother or father desperate to change their living conditions or not, or to be rich or for whatever reasons, we're going to take care of your son at Alabama. That faculty can go straight to hell. In fact, they're already in hell. You can name a building for Arthurine Lucy. We talked about that. And there are some, we have fine colleagues here at the University of Alabama, and there are a lot of faculty there. They're a lot more uh, progressive, a lot more human centered than the state of Alabama and Kay Ivey, Grandma Clan, and the rest of that crew down there, building prisons with COVID money and all that. The faculty at Alabama is not to be blamed for this, but let's be very clear. Them boys are not going to Alabama. Those girls, those women and men who are playing athletics at Alabama are not there for the classroom experience. They're not at Jackson State necessarily for the classroom experience, but the institution is going to require them to be. That's not going to transplant to Colorado. I'm sure you remember and wrote about and probably even interviewed and maybe spent some time with a brother who, my brother in love, as they would say. They say brother-in-law, but that don't mean nothing to us. My brother Randy Fuller, my sister's husband, he played for years in the NFL. He's a cornerback. He played for the Seahawks. He played for the Falcons, went to the Super Bowl with the Steelers. And when he was at the Steelers, one of his best friends on the team was a young brother named Cordell Stewart, who came to our dissertation defenses. In fact, they had a day off and they flew from Pittsburgh down to Philly to come to our dissertation defenses. It was a beautiful thing. And Dr. Carruthers, Jake Carruthers, like, hey, man, I'm here for the defense, but I'm trying to meet Cordell Stewart because he was the quarterback before he was at the Steelers for Colorado. Remember that?
Mhm. And most people only know him as Portia. Portia's husband.
That
Y'all,
is amazing to me.
how is he more famous than him?
That
Somebody
is amazing. That
make
just
that
shows
make
you the short circuit of memory. Slash.
Underground Railroad. Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
Isn't that something? That is amazing, right? Because Cordell Stewart, of course, who was at obviously at Pittsburgh, in the long tradition of quarterbacks who had to put up with all kind of stuff. I think about Jefferson Street Joe Gillum, of course, who's from Tennessee State, who should have been the starter. And we talk about football and politics, or before that, Eldridge Dickey, the Lord's Prayer. Because in some ways, the fear that the white nationalists have, of course, in athletics here in the United States of America, is that exactly what you said. These HBCUs going, but in some ways, that will be a Wahemi Mizzou. In other words, the HBCUs might return to where they were in terms of athletics in the 1950s and 60s. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, when the best back, talk about the Dallas Cowboys, well, you got to talk about somebody called the world's fastest human, Bullet Bob Wright. No, Bob Hayes. Bullet Bob Hayes out of Florida A&M. You got to talk about sweetness, Walter Payton out of Jackson State University. You got to talk about Buck Buchanan and Ed Too Tall Jones out of Tennessee State. James Shack Harris out of Grambling. You talk about Doug Williams out of Grambling. In other words, this wouldn't be unprecedented. It would be a Wahine Mesu with one adjustment. The integration that Jerry Jones was trying to stop as a stalwart teenage Klan adjacent boy allowed him, as he grew to manhood, to cherry pick the Negroes who were on HBCU rosters and bring them to the HWCUs, the plantation schools, in the name of integration. But if there was a return to the HBCUs, now you ain't got black people busting down the doors to go to the white schools. You can still go there. So many of y'all gonna go there. But now some of us coming back to where we are. And the simple fact of the matter is they shouldn't be coming to follow Coach Prime. And they never came to follow Coach Prime because, like my brother-in-law, Randy Fuller, he wanted to go to Tennessee State from jump. One of his mentees, when he coached on that staff under Coach Rod Reed, my classmate, Cromartie, he is an all-pro corner, was an all-pro cornerback in the NFL. He wanted to come to Tennessee State. There are still black athletes, women and men. Robert Covington played basketball at Tennessee State. He's on the NBA roster. I mean, you can still get there. Now, what Prime did was put a target on the back of all the HBCUs. I'm thinking we got to think the long game in this. And right now, there are people who are saying, came for Prime, stayed for the band. Came for Prime, stayed for the degree. Came for Prime, stayed for the governance feeling, the ways of knowing, the movement and memory. That's not going to be a lot, because we all have to remember, in this field of violence called semi-professional and professional athletics in the United States of America, these young people who go to these institutions, those who have the best and the most developed athletic ability, are basically rentals for a year or two. So how many of them would have stayed 4 years? I can imagine what kind of conversation is going to be between Deion Sanders and his sons, who, because of name, image, and licensing, are able to take their celebrity wherever they go. And once they get out there in the cold-ass border, Boulder, Colorado, and realize them girls ain't out there. Oh, there will be girls, but they won't be them girls in Mississippi. They're going to be them girls from Boulder. You know what I mean? They're going to perhaps say, Dad, I understand, but I don't understand. Thank you. Buck Buchanan was Grambling. That's right. Buck Buchanan was Grambling. That's exactly right. Grambling, of course, who one time led all the colleges in the country, a number of NFL players coming from one school. That's what they were afraid of. But, you know, it's interesting thinking about this in the context of what you're saying. The bamboo is the institutions. And the question of what you get from an HBCU must be tied to what you give to an HBCU. Deion Sanders is not a product of historically black college or university, but he is a product of Africana communities. So Deion Sanders in Boulder, Colorado, or wherever he may end up at $5 to $7 million a year, however much money. And if he wouldn't go for 5 to 7 next year, they'd be back with 14 to 21. The year after that, they'd be back for 240, whatever. You got to stop this slave rebellion. At least that's how they perceive it, not realizing that he ain't the bamboo, but you'll get it in the long run. Because see, the pushback against this too is if and when he leaves, if it's today, tomorrow, next week, next year, whenever, everybody realizes what has happened. This is y'all trying to prevent a slave rebellion, and all you've done is engendered more resentment. So somewhere there's a 6 or 7-year-old to say, I would die before I run up and down a field for a white school. And you ain't gonna know about her until women's basketball becomes the biggest sport in the country in 20 years. And she's playing for South Carolina State because she swore she would never play for the university. You see, this is the thing y'all don't understand about us. You think you beat us, but the us you think we are is a figment of your imagination. And so when Deion Sanders is in the locker room talking like he talking, boy, you shine like new money, boy. You coming here with them chains on your, we're gonna go ahead and make this. Then white sports writers looking at you like, look at this monkey. As long as we win, though, because this is, man. But if we stop, what did he say? I don't even understand what he said. Meanwhile, in Jackson, the writers, the people in there, the fans, like, yeah, boy, you shine like new, and then put on that Bobby Blue Lamb. Remember we used to go to the casino and listen to, yeah. That's what you're leaving in Jackson, bro. And I ain't mad at you. This is not a critique of Deion Sanders because I understand that the bamboo ain't you, brother. You came to Jackson State with all of that because you was raised by black people in black communities. This your first job where you can be that. Might be your last job where you can be that. And when they come for you, and in a moment of frustration, you say, "No, see, y'all making me sad, man. Y'all make me think I should have never left Jackson." And the headline the next day, and all the press in the whole white world is Sanders' resentment surfaces. No explanation for why he can't win the game. Perhaps he's overmatched mentally, while Jim Harbaugh could lose everything, including his car keys, for years. But now that he done got Michigan right with with the Negro talent, he's a genius. But they gave him time. See, the time is what you would have had, Deion, if you had stayed at Jackson State. If you leave, you ain't gonna have no time at Colorado. Yeah, they may give you 5-year contract, 4-year contract, but even if you win and win and win and win again, the message has been sent to our communities, which is for those of you who want to do that, y'all follow Deion. Your name, your label will go from cheerleader for black institutions to beautiful pair of earrings for white institutions, nice wrist bracelet or ring for white institutions. But the part of you who will continue to be celebrated, all of that, which you will be well celebrated for and beautifully celebrated for and importantly celebrated for, you're going to leave that in Mississippi, brother. Thanks for the new turf. The stadium was there, but, thanks for the refurbishings. Thanks for all that. But all that stays. And guess who gets to come in next? Or maybe next, or maybe next. Somebody who's not you, but who played in the leagues, who has some celebrity, who has a different objective. I have no doubt you got a different objective too. But see, the white boys understand they're gonna put money, which leads me now to where we want to kind of wind this up. I should mention this though. Go ahead.
I just want to, as you were talking, I was thinking about how people build their careers off of us when their intention is always to be accepted by them, whether it's black media, whether it's politicians. I think about politicians that move into Newark and then, become mayor and then senator because they want to be president. I'm like, but serve the community, and I've been talking to a lot of politicians on the show, and you think, and I was just asking and talking to Chris Jones, and he's really, his goal is to build Arkansas. It's not, I don't, like he's a rocket scientist. He wants to build the community that he grew up in because that's important. And imagine if every politician that we elect cared enough about the place that they come from, that's their goal. Not, I'm gonna use this space to get here. I'm gonna use this space because this is the stepping stone to that money, or this is the stepping stone to being on, network television, or this, but I want to build my community with this art, with this sport, with these political, aspirations. I want to use politics to make the schools better in my community that I come from, because I come from here. Imagine if we elected, if that's a requirement, like,
yes,
you don't get my vote unless, give me your receipts for having done these things, and that you're from here too, because that matters. And imagine if everybody from a place had somebody from a place representing them.
We got to have a place. Something you brought up earlier the week when we were exchanging messages, and I brought it thanks to you to my students on Thursday, was the story you saw about Nigeria and language policy. And I thank you for that, because I had glanced at a headline, but I hadn't really focused on it. You sent it to me. I said, let me take this right in here. I said, my colleague, Professor Hunter, brought this to my attention. Let's talk about this. And of course, that's a classroom with 100 students in it, most of them, from all over the African world. So there are Nigerian students in there. How y'all feel about this? And they started talking about, would you introduce that? Because I want to use that.
You often talk about this car crash that we're talking in this language called English. And there are no words, even talking with Dr. Beatty, that really truly represent the spirit of how we move in the world. We got all of these, utterances, so we can communicate. But imagine, so Nigeria, first of all, let me just shout out Nigeria when they said no advertising without Nigerians in it. Like all of this white facing, everybody white, get off of the advertising. I was like, oh, they on something right now.
It's a very Nigerian thing to do. These are the most unruly Negroes. That's how you know Africans who came through enslavement. That's how you know most of us got some Nigerian blood, because them is the most turn up nigga. When they decide to do something, they just be like, F it. They go from 0 to 100, y'all. They got no
Yes.
chill in Nigeria.
Now the schools, so English was the national language.
Yes.
And no longer. So started, you will now be taught in the language of your community. And I was like, damn.
How about that?
What does that look like? And what does that mean? Because it's so powerful. And I wanted to read a quote. Hopefully I can find it quickly, because the story's not up. I don't have the story up because I got Deion Sanders up. I got Cordell Stewart up. Got me Google searching all these folk.
Oh,
let me find the
story. The story you sent me?
Yes, I got it. Let me just go to my text and then pull it up. But you got it? You got it up?
Yeah,
hold
you
on.
got it.
Okay, hold on. I'm just y'all just
right there.
Sing. Okay, you got it right there. Okay, but it was a quote. Okay. The education minister said pupils learn much better when they're taught in their own mother tongue. And I was like, what does that mean for us?
That's the question I asked the students. What would it look like for us? Now, this is interesting, right? Because like we are in Nubia 7 days a week at this point, including Monday night when we have our Africana Studies class. What does that look for us? What does that mean to us, Prof? I mean, now here are folk, and we do it when we convene. We're here like this. You got Africans from the Caribbean, you got Africans from Latin America, Central America, Africans from North America, Canada, and the United States. You got Africans from the continent of Africa. And how many languages did they say in that story, Prof? They speak in Nigeria. I think it's near the end. It's a short article, but so powerful, packed such a punch.
God dog it. All right.
Now you see.
Do you have it up? Do you have it up?
Yeah, let me see.
Hold on. Oh, I got it. 600. 600 languages.
Please understand, when people talk about Africa like it's one place, it's 600 different languages in Nigeria alone. So you come into school to be taught, and think about this is a beautiful thing. And this is the genius, I think, of our aspirations and the distance between our aspirations and being able to implement, because the nation state is a fictional concept. Everybody's written about that. Basil Davidson. I mean, so many people have written about that and talked about that. When you draw imaginary lines around people, you sever natural cultural connections, and then you engender artificial ones that eventually grow into a different kind of consciousness. That's what they try to do in the United States. Nigeria is the same as the United States, and different in the sense that the Africans of Nigeria are indigenous, like the First Nations people here in the United States and the Western Hemisphere. So just like there are thousands of different nations in the United States who got shoved into a concept called United States and then forced marched places like, as I was saying last week, my niece, nephew, and sister and brother-in-law were all in Alabama this past week over the break. This time last year, of course, we were with my mom in Tennessee, and we were, they in Alabama, and they were, down there where my grandmother and grandfather's little house was. My granddaddy built with his own hands, the cinder block house. And Gussie was talking, she sent me a picture of an ancestor that I had not seen, who is the mother of my grandmother's sister. And this sister, the Williams line of my clan, she comes out of the Creek people. Not completely Creek, but Creek are indigenous people. We know those people got forced marched along with the Seminoles, many of them into Oklahoma. But again, these are different groups of people who now we say, they're in this country, this state, this state. Well, in Nigeria is no different. You draw an imaginary line around all those people. You got 600 different languages today. They call themselves Nigerian. So when you say you're going to be taught in the language of your community, what does that look like in a school system? Because they ain't 600. It would be like teaching all the indigenous people here in the language of their communities, which of course this criminal enterprise called United States of America worked hard to strip those languages out of their mouths. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, in the context of Africans of the diaspora, I asked that question to the students, and the students were like, well, what will be our indigenous tongue? So somebody finally hit what I wanted them to say. Ebonics? I said, yeah. Because this was the controversy. If you remember, some of y'all remember this, Tony Cook and others out in the Bay Area in Oakland, the white facing commercial press, social structure press, tried to float this lie that African people in the school boards in Oakland and other places wanted to teach Ebonics in the schools. And so there were all these thought pieces. Oh, you want to teach Ebonics? Hold on, slow down. The child came to school speaking Ebonics. What they're saying is you do not devalue the language she brings into this first grade classroom while you are teaching European American vernacular English. You're not correcting her speech. You are linking her speech to a speech she's not familiar with. So it is like becoming, in a way, a form of bilingual. But what you want to do is punish her home speech. The genius of her home speech was she brought into that room because that's the speech of her community. Her mom them, which is grammatically correct, which means what? The people closest to her and all her relatives and community. Translated as her mom and them. What's mom and them? How do you? Okay, this is what you do if you speak Ebonics. You have her come to the board, write mom and them. Mom and them. Now put an equal. Now translate that from your language to the white language. My mother and others. That's close. Others like who? We know my auntie and them. So others is not just random others. No, it's other. Oh, so you're gonna have to translate that a little bit more. Others related by blood? Well, yeah, blood. Well, also my mama friend, because she be okay. So others related by blood and community. How do you? In other words, you know how hard it is to translate the genius of Ebonics into European American vernacular English? And it's not just hard today, it's been hard. What does that mean? Translate that. Been hard, meaning it has been hard for the entire existence of this language formation we call Ebonics. You got to use a lot more words, and you still ain't really got at it. Because when I say my mom and them, it's like Deion Sanders and said, my boys and them go take these boys and them. Yeah, you say that in Colorado, and then sports writers are like ignorant black. Well, they may not write that. They'll say colorful language of the beloved Coach Sanders, who recruited 5 more Negroes who can't read or write, and said he was doing it to help them become young men. But the classrooms in Colorado, the Black Student Union is on strike again because one of the professors came in and said Black people had no history. See, you're not going out there to improve the lives of Black men, Deion. You may think you are, and I'm not critiquing you. I'm saying you're going to leave that in Jackson. The faculty to do that is in Mississippi, not Colorado. But in terms of language, and all this is spurred by what you raised, Prof, in terms of how we commit to building institutions. In Nigeria, it's easier, even as it will be difficult to scale that up. In the diaspora, it's harder. Now, Jamaica, Haiti, and I'm listening to the students, having a conversation with the students. Some of them Haitian, some of them Jamaican, second generation, some of them first generation, maybe third generation and fourth generation. What does that look like there? That's what the Europeans would call the patois or the creoles. Well, you have to do that already. Because in addition to the Creole in Haiti, you got to speak Creole because that's what they speak at home. But you speak it too as a teacher. You can translate that into French because the French the Haitians speak ain't the French accepted in France any more than the Spanish the Puerto Ricans and Cubans speak is accepted in Spain. Those are the various Ebonics, which is why Ebonics is the correct term coined by Robert Williamson, as we talked about, not Black English. Black English is an attempt to impose a social structure formation on our cultural meaning making, on our languages. It's not Black English. It's Ebonics. It is African languages molded and adapted and shot through with the languages of colonialism. And it is more than words. It is phonology, it is sounds, it's syntax, it's idiom, which means if you speak Ebonics in Georgia or Jamaica, everybody know what means. It's the sound. The core of it is a governance concept, a way of knowing concept, a meaning making concept. The language is going to extend out of that. It's not Black English. Anyone is Black French or Black Spanish. Now, I said all that to say that in that conversation, that would be and it is a hell of a conversation for us to have. What would indigenous African languages brought into the classrooms by African people all over the continent of Africa? Remember, this is the beef that the students and the people in South Africa had in 1976 at Soweto. In June 1976, when the damn white boys and South African police killed those Black kids, beginning with Hector Peterson, the 16-year-old there in Soweto. They didn't want to go to school to be instructed in Afrikaans. Well, in Oakland in the late 80s, they're saying respect the language that the young people come into the classroom with, and got pushback from all the white boys. Of course they did. Of course they did. Even when you stumble in with your forms of variations on the English language, whether it be the hills of West Virginia or Southern Ohio or the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, you're not berated for how you speak because the teachers know that. But when the African child come in, unless you in a black school where you got black teachers, again, shout out to El Mekki and them, got to have more black teachers in the room, you're going to miss. If you go into a classroom in Philly and you don't know what a joint is, and you start punishing the children because they know what a joint is and you don't, that was one of the first episodes of Abbott Elementary. Remember when she put John on the
Yes.
yeah,
And Bull.
and Bull, oh, the Bull for real. Oh, that Bull had the joint out, and I was looking at that joint like, come on, man, come on, Bull. Somebody don't speak is completely confused at this time, right? Exactly. So at the nexus of that becomes intellectual warfare. And for that, I wanted to bring our elder who just had a birthday, the great Adelaide Sanford. This is her memoir she just published with Haki Mabuti, From Enslavement to Belovedness for the Dignity of My People, Dr. Adelaide Sanford. Because they tried to crucify her when she was up to be a regent on the New York State Board of Regents. I don't know if you remember that. I pulled up an interview Adelaide Sanford gave. Years later, she was interviewed, and of course, she was born in 1925, so that puts her at 97, Dr. Sanford. And she said that they tried to get me. She said they accused me when I was up for the Board of Regents. They accused me of wanting to teach the teachers Ebonics. She said, I never took a public stand on Ebonics. She said it was a major conference at Medgar Evers, again, shout out to Laria and them, and the National Organization of Linguistics declared Ebonics as a language. She said it has a syntax, it has a system, it's grammatically intricate and so forth. And I never spoke at this conference. I wasn't involved in the conference. However, subsequent to that, after that, Charles Barron, who was then a member of the council, city council, had a forum with Reverend Herbert Daltrey at their church. And they talked about Ebonics. And I was a participant in that panel. I tried to help them understand that no one was talking about teaching Ebonics. The children come speaking Ebonics. But every language system that a child brings to school should be respected as a language system. You don't condemn it because the language is full communication. There's no language that's superior to any other language. It's all I ever said about Ebonics. But when the issue came about my running for the chancellor of the Board of Regents, they dragged it out and ran this article in the paper, said I was a supporter of Ebonics, even had a manufactured picture of me with a sign that said Ebonics. He said, I've never taken a public stand. Now, she was being political at that moment. Because again, Adelaide Sanford comes from an era, my mom and them, that era. The language at home, you speak with your governance community. The language at school, you go learn that language. And there are moments when you're trying to thread a needle. Deion Sanders, God bless him, trying to thread a needle at Jackson State. Adelaide Sanford trying to thread a needle in New York. Greg Carr, Karen Hunter, we thread needles when we find ourselves in these social structure formations that we're trying to navigate for our people. Again, the name of her memoir, For the Dignity of My People. You know, and in fact, Mama Adelaide went with us to Kemet. The last time we were in Kemet, no, 2 times before she went. She was there when Asa Hilliard made transition, and one of her very close friends, Joyce King. We were talking about that. We were at the Asa Hilliard conference a couple of months ago. But anyway, I'm bringing all this up to say that when you raise this question, Karen, of what it looks like to allow a thing to take root, and what it looks like to stay in a place, to reconnect to a place. When you're talking about language instruction in Nigeria, they're engaged in something that, you know, Ngugi wa Thiong'o might call something torn and new. There was no Nigeria prior to the invasion. Now there is a Nigeria. So how do you engage in a Wahemi Mesu, a repetition of the birth for a thing that was born out of violence? Well, you have a head start in the sense that you can go back and reclaim things that you never really fully abandoned because you preserved them in your communities. But now you want that structure to reflect that. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o, of course, many years ago, here's a little volume that Pope's probably familiar with that was originally published in 1986, called Decolonizing the Mind, the politics of language in African literature. And this is in Ngugi, top of his head anyway. In Ngugi's point in this little volume of essays, one of the points he's been saying, is a world famous writer. They keep saying when's he gonna win the Nobel Prize. My thing is who gives a damn about the Nobel Prize? Give it to him if the prize means something. You not giving Ngugi wa Thiong'o the Nobel Prize is a condemnation of the Nobel Prize. It ain't got nothing to do with Ngugi. But Ngugi, and we had him come speak to our students at freshman seminar. We had a whole semester. The students read Something Torn and New, which is one of his books. In fact, I got a copy of it right here because I still teach this book. And in fact, we'll be reading it in the Africana Studies class when we get down to the second part of the class, Something Torn and New. Well, in Decolonizing the Mind, and Ngugi makes a point. One of the things he says, I'm going to stop writing in English. My first language is Gikuyu. After that, the regional language is Kiswahili. And if you want to read my writing, then I want you to read it. You get your translators. Maybe I'll find something for you. And you'll translate it from Gikuyu or Kiswahili into English, into French, into Spanish. What we're going to stop doing is devaluing our languages. Ngugi been saying that. And it's very important to understand because where does that leave us as African people in the diaspora who have our own ways of knowing, who have our distinct but connected meaning making, cultural meaning making, whose movement and memory is now so deeply influenced by the trauma of enslavement that if we're not careful, we anchor it all in enslavement. To bring up somebody whose birthday I think was yesterday. No, the 1st of December, the great Lou Rawls. This time last year, we was talking about Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, talking about Lou Rawls. But Lou Rawls recorded another song called Tobacco Road. When you come out the hood, do you want to stay in the hood? No. Do you want to abandon the hood? No. So when Lou Rawls says, I was born in a dump. My mama died and my daddy got drunk. He left me here to die or grow in the middle of Tobacco Road. But it's a home, the only life I've ever known. And the Lord knows I loathe Tobacco Road. Now you think, okay, I'm leaving. I was born in a dump. My mama cried, my daddy got drunk. But then he goes on to say, I'm gonna leave and get a job. That's how you know it's the blues. With the help and the grace from God. Save my money and get rich, I know, and bring it back to Tobacco Road. See, the whole point is I was fortified in that place you call a dump with values. And those values want me. They urge me, they require me to bring it back into that place and change the material condition, not the deepest cultural values and principles. This is the thing that we miss. Our values have been the reason we still exist. That's why, again, you connect them to Africa, to the diaspora. Our values are why we continue. And as those values, here we're going to bring it full circle. Those values sustain us. The question you raised, Prof, of how we engendering, returning to Wahemi Mesu, repetition of the birth of those values, grounding in those values, strengthen our institutions so that we can stave off the worst of these attacks from the social structure and continue to grow, which will ultimately benefit all humanity. That is the dilemma we have, and there's not an example in terms of the things we're aware of collectively, which is why we spend time talking about celebrities, not because they are so great, but because they have visibility, which then gives us a moment to have point of entry for conversations about like this. What can we learn from those things that will ultimately help us return to, Lou Rawls might say, Tobacco Road. We would say the governance formations that we build. And in that respect, we kind of spend our final few minutes together in Jackson, Mississippi, at Jackson State, which was Jackson State College in 1967 to 68 when Margaret Walker Alexander, Gwen Brooks' good friend, came to Jackson State. She's from Birmingham, Alabama. Margaret Walker, born in 1915. Her family moved. Her daddy was a minister. I think her mom was a teacher, I think. They moved to New Orleans when she was 9 or 10 years old. She eventually spent time at New Orleans University, which became Dillard University. Then they went to Chicago. She went to Chicago, Northwestern University. Eventually got a master's degree at Iowa University, graduate training. In fact, wrote her dissertation. Her dissertation and the writer's work at Iowa became her novel, her famous novel, Jubilee. And Margaret Walker spent her professional career, most of her professional career as an academic at Jackson State College. This is an interview. I know. I think I put those other Black worlds in storage. But if you go on Google Books and look under Black World, type in Phyllis Wheatley and Jackson State. Look around maybe February 1974. You'll find the cover of Black World for that issue is a bust of Phyllis Wheatley, a bronze bust with her finger up against her temple. You've probably seen this picture if you don't have any African American art collection books. The great sculptress Elizabeth Catlett, the great artist, more than just plastic. I've seen that bust. I've seen a wooden version of it. It was on display here when they were finishing up the Museum of African American History and Culture. They had a wooden one that she had done on display next door at the Museum of American History. And let me pause here and raise the name of my dear friend and colleague, Kinshasa Conwell, who is the Deputy Director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She's retiring. Well, she won't be going to the museum every day, but as I joked with her, I sent her a message. I was down there the other day. I was like, I'm in your building. I know you can't spell retire. I don't know any Black women and men who can spell that when they working for us. But anyway, I just thought about Kinshasa because while they were preparing the building, they had some of the things that were going to go in there in the other building in the Museum of American History. And one of them was the Elizabeth Catlett wooden one. But if you go to February 1974, you should be able to see that on the cover. But this is from December 1975. Oh, the reason they had it, that bust, reason why Elizabeth Catlett had made that bust, it was dedicated in let me go here so I can remember this is an interview with Margaret Walker in the December 1975 issue of Black World. Margaret Walker, who we're going to end with today, on the occasion of something I'm about to show you all. Charles Rowell, who for many years was the editor of Callaloo magazine, interviewed her. And he says, Margaret Walker Alexander, poet and novelist of epic scope, was born in 1915 in Birmingham, Alabama, received her bachelor's degree from Northwestern University, went to Dillard before that, MA and PhDs from the University of Iowa, where she submitted Jubilee, her prize-winning novel, as for her doctoral dissertation in 1942. 1942. She's born in 1915, so do the math. 15, 25, 35, 20, add 7 years. She's 27 years old. In 1942, For My People, her first published volume of poetry. I think you see where we're going with this. Deion Sanders, For My People. In 1942, For My People, her first published volume of poetry, won the Yale University Younger Poets Award. Okay. And in 1966, she was given the Houghton Mifflin, publishers, Award for Jubilee. That's the novel. She ended up suing Alex Haley in Roots. Story for another day. Her book, How I Wrote Jubilee, Third World Press, 1972, gives, among other things, information on the research that went into the making of her historical novel. She's also published volumes of poetry, goes on. But this is where I want to bring it. At present, Margaret Walker is the professor of English and director of the Institute for the Study of History, Life, and Culture of Black People at Jackson State College, Jackson, Mississippi. See, Margaret Walker could have gone a whole lot of places. She went back to Mississippi, said, this is where I'm going to plant my institution. She spent the rest of her professional career. And she endured a lot of mess at Jackson State. You can imagine as a woman, not just Black, as a woman and by Black people. But she founded the Institute for the Study of History, Life, and Culture of Black People at Jackson State College. It's still there, except they don't call it that anymore. They call it the Margaret Walker Institute. I'm a little torn about that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to honor an individual, but I like that other name. Says, and they couldn't, I guess, could call them both. In addition to teaching and writing and speaking and reading throughout the country, she continues to organize and direct conferences on Black culture, writers' conferences, and poetry festivals at Jackson State. Ooh. Not University of Mississippi, not University of Colorado or NYU or Alabama, not the University of South Carolina, Jackson State. The most notable being, and here's where Elizabeth Catlett did the bust for, the historical Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival of November 1973. There's still a few people around who are drawing breath who were invited to that festival. Ask Sonny Sanchez, ask Nikki Giovanni. Next line, Rao writes, the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, to which 20 Black women poets were invited to read, is one of the most important literary festivals organized in this country. It was a tribute to Phyllis Wheatley, a celebration of the first book published by a Black woman living in America. The following interview was recorded by telephone in Jackson and Tougaloo, Mississippi in May 1973. And he starts with a conference they had been to at Southern University. And then she talks about her history going forward. But I'm raising that to get to this point. This book just came out. Our colleague, my friend Mariama Graham, who was a student of Margaret Walker, has just published this book. Mariama's book, The House Where My Soul Lives, The Life of Margaret Walker. The House Where My Soul Lives. I'll bet you 1 billion times out of a billion that Deion Sanders' soul will never live at the University of Colorado. His soul lives with his family and his community. He's going to take that wherever he goes. But the house where your soul lives, beyond that, bruh, you about to leave that. And guess what? That house going to continue because it's made of bamboo. You also made of bamboo, but whereas your bamboo commingling with the bamboo of the institution where you are to strengthen your shoot, you about to go try to plant yours in some stony soil. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, like the rod on the back of that brother that Will Smith is playing. Born in the days when hope unborn had died. That is the distinction, the trauma that engendered our need. And we'll get to this in part 2 of our Africana Studies class when we ask the question, framing question 2. One being, how do we undertake the study of Africana, which is why we're spending our time going through these conceptual categories. Number 2 of the 6, how did Africans preserve and affirm their ways of life and use their identities as means to resist enslavement and colonialism for that matter? The culture we used is what allows us to do that. Well, it's very important for us to understand that what Mariama Graham does here, she starts with how she met Margaret Walker. She had read her as a young person. She herself is a Southerner, Mariama Graham. She's a professor at the University of Kansas, done some incredible work, wonderful sister. I wish that African institutions in the United States had the resources and the capacity so that she would never have to work at a University of Kansas or any other white school. But I am realistic in the fact of 2 things. Number one, there is no institution in this country that is called a HBCU that is so different in terms of how it is organized from a white school that we can confidently say that we have met Du Bois's challenge to be a full Black institution, which is why, frankly, one of the reasons why, we continue to contribute, we continue to work. I'm committed to working in Black institutions, but then we build narrative Nubia. We build spaces that are completely from the beginning through a Wahemi Mesu, something torn and new. So we don't, it's only so far you can go in a structure that's not going to allow you, because see, that structure is set up so that it's never going to relinquish power. You're always going to aspire to be in the whiteness. And if you don't aspire to be in the whiteness, then they maybe try to lure your head coach away. And if they can't do that, they just keep on till they finally introduce some kind of scandal. Or if they can't do that, they just simply create a super league with all of them and then say you can't play in it. In other words, this is how power works. They're never going to concede. They're never going to concede. This opening gambit to get Sanders out of Jackson State, that's just the first step. If that didn't work, they go to step 2. If that didn't work, they would go to, I don't know, maybe DEFCON 3 or whatever they would do. They would keep going, to use the military language, in a way that is more appropriate rather than somebody who probably should have stayed in school, particularly since his mama was at Chicago State. But that's a story for another day. What she writes in this massive book, and I encourage y'all, this is a book I say is worth for people to read. It's 650 pages. And she spent a lot of time with Margaret Walker. She interviewed everybody living who she could think of, between Ron Bennett all the way through, who knew her well in Chicago, knew her in Iowa, knew her in Mississippi. And I'm raising this because I want to end with these 2 final things. Margaret Walker. Oh man, I hope see, Mariama did a few things with Margaret Walker over the years. This is a collection that she edited with Margaret Walker called How I Wrote Jubilee. Remember this, the How I Wrote Jubilee essay was published by Hakeem Mahmoudi, who was very close with Gwendolyn Brooks and Margaret Walker, himself a poet. This is this version was published by the Feminist Press in 1990, but Third World Press is where you really see where this was going. But I want to raise this because, let me see if I can find it quickly. This is a book that I never keep far from my Hold on, let me see if I can find it quickly. It's going to take me. Here we go. Yes, this is an essay that Margaret Walker. This is the first two things I'm going to end with. And this is a message, of course, not Deion Sanders. God bless you, brother. I wish you nothing but success. Because if and when you leave Jackson State, what you built there will endure because you've contributed to something. You didn't bring it. Okay. I say this as somebody who went to a HBCU and works at one. That special sauce from the governance of African people, the ways of knowing of African people. I'm not talking about all the stuff that they run off and try to be blackface versions of white schools. I'm talking about the things that people bring with them, like the Ebonics that young people bring to the classrooms, like the 600 languages the children of Nigeria bring to the classrooms, that the state is now realizing you need to engender that because you beginning to put that full middle finger up against white supremacy. And if you think getting some ball players to go play at HBCUs is rogue, wait till the African countries continue to be rogue, because there's something that they engendered about 20 years ago called the Asmara Declaration. They were in Eritrea, and this is the African Union, and some language folk came together and they said, we are now pushing for African languages to be taught. We're getting there. We're not there. We're not almost there, but we are moving in that direction. And the more we move in that direction, and the more we move in that direction, the more we strengthen wherever we're struggling in any particular place we are. And by the way, we didn't talk about it today. Maybe we could talk about it next week, because it's going to keep this whole California Reparations Commission as a long article in the New York Times and many other places. Now they're recommending, $200 and some $1,000 a piece be given to the descendants of enslaved Africans who were enslaved or have connections to enslavement in California, which is a remarkable step relative to what has been recommended before. The commission is recommending that. Of course, then the real war starts. But I don't,
or like in Providence, where white folk are gonna be able to get reparation. I said, wait, what? Hold up.
Absolutely, because
White people, what now?
Yeah, I mean, look at the Native Americans. We know where this is going. Which is my this is where I depart with the Sandy Darities of the world and others who want to engender this notion of reparations in lineage in those who were enslaved in the United States. I absolutely understand the arguments. I embrace the intent, and I wholly and fundamentally reject the approach, because the approach is one that engenders separation among African people, political separation, because it is seized upon by those who have inherited some form of self-hatred that they project outward against other Africans. And believe me, there are class dimensions to this. There are all types of things that are shot through, but I think that fundamental approach is just flawed for two reasons. Number one, it separates us, and that is not a way of knowing that we must continue to promote and engender. And it flies in the face of the very people you claim you're trying to have. Yeah, we'll talk about this next week. We certainly will talk about it next. We won't get too deep into it. The only reason I was going to say is it's going to fail, because see, the social structure as it's set up, you think that you somehow have you've kind of colored in the lines of the legal universe, the American legal universe, by choosing lineage and provable harm as a point of entry for standing over race, because race is illegal in the California State Constitution to use race. That's not going to help you, because all they're going to say is that you're using lineage as a proxy for race. And Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean at Berkeley Law, tried to tell y'all that today. He testified, and I testified the day after and say I agree with Dean Chemerinsky. But that's a story for another day. We'll talk about it next week. Margaret Walker at Jackson State, like Deion Sanders. Margaret Walker, unlike Deion Sanders, engendered in a teaching and learning tradition completely poured and anchored in the development of African minds and others, but beginning with the South, where she was from, an African person whose father and mother had the house full of literature. She said, I read County Cullen. My sister got a County Cullen book. I got the other book. I wanted the County Cullen book. We had to memorize those poems. Langston Hughes, who she saw at 16 years old. Richard Wright, who she was very close to. She wrote a book called Richard Wright, Demonic Genius. I mean, and Mariama got her chapter and verse. When I tell you this book is a joy, I'm only about 40 pages in, because last week of school we shutting things down. But I mean, it's a celebration of the life of Margaret Walker. And as Miriam Graham writes near the beginning, it's like my voice and her voice are commingled. I knew her for so long. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing. I'm going to now, but in this book of essays, How I Wrote Jubilee, there's an essay that she published, Margaret Walker, published in Many Shades of Black. And I got a copy of that somewhere around here, but I didn't go look for it. I didn't need to, because I got this, 1969. This was republished in this book. The name of the essay Margaret Walker wrote, Jackson State College. She'd been there about a year then. willing to pay the price. This is what Margaret Walker says down through the years, echoing in our ears on this weekend when we might hear some news out of Colorado. Margaret Walker writes, here in the United States, success with a capital S is measured in materialistic terms of fame and fortune. An artist is not basically concerned with this kind of success. A creative worker dealing with the fiery lightning of imagination is interested in artistic accomplishment, and I have spent my life seeking this kind of fulfillment. As long as I live, this will be my quest. And as such, the superficial trappings of success can have no real meaning for me. I do not really care what snide remarks my conferees make, nor how searing the words of caustic critics are. Life is too short for me to concern myself with anything but the work I must do before my day is done. If there are any single factors that have blessed my life with the best, they are intelligent parents who not only fired my ambition and demanded that I set my sights high and be judged by standards of excellence, but also insisted that I seek spiritual values and crave righteousness and integrity more than money. Remarkable teachers in 3 of the nation's finest academic institutions, and lessons learned from bitter experience and from fellow writers. Linked with these factors has also been an indispensable element of luck and good fortune. If you're going to go through a rites of passage with our people in a governance formation, if you've come out of our communities, then if you're going to call yourself a leader in our communities, it can't be for your individual advancement, and you can't mistake your individual advancement somehow as a proxy for the rest of us. You can better any place you find yourself in, but you're doing that because not just because of your individual talent and ability, because of the institutions that nurtured and developed that ability, that took you through the rites of passage, that initiated you into the space. And when you leave that space, you still have an obligation. It shifts if you move from a place like Jackson State to University of Colorado. Your obligation persists, and I have no doubt, given what he said and how he's acted, that Coach Sanders would do that. At the same time, if you do it in an institutional formation like a Margaret Walker, that's the long game, baby. And the long game will free us. And it will not only free us, it will free everybody else too. That's what they're waking into in Nigeria. That's what they're waking into. And so I'll take, if it's all right, Prof, because I know we right up against 2.5 hours. I want to end with this. I said I would end with those two things. 1944. Margaret Walker. I'm sorry. Duh.
Hold that up. Hold that up.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. This is called The Negro Caravan. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. This is actually
probably not.
no, but it should be brought back into print, because this is the book that took the baton from Elaine Locke's 1925, The New Negro, which is in print all kinds. This is the thing I love about our people. You know, a lot of whom are my friends. You go to white schools, you get $2 or $3 more. It's like the equivalent of Deion Sanders going to Colorado. And then, out of sense of obligation, not questioning motive, you rediscover or bring back into print these classics, and then you do them with white university presses. Oxford University Press, Harvard University Press, University of North Carolina Press, New York University Press. And is it better than not doing it? I wonder sometimes, but I'm not going to say anymore, because, you know, HBCU should have presses. Howard University Press, Fisk University Press, Southern University Press. We need the collective presses, maybe an HBCU press. Anyway, I'm going to say less about that, because Filine was one of the journals that Margaret Walker published in. That was a journal started by Du Bois. In 1941, The Negro Caravan, a massive book of 1,082 pages, actually. This book was published, edited by 3 titans on HBCU faculty: scholar activists, scholar writers, scholar teachers. The great Sterling Allen Brown at Howard University, Arthur P. Davis at Virginia University, and Ulysses Lee, Lincoln University. This is a book, The Negro Caravan, that included a number of writers, anthologies, and they said at the beginning, several anthologies of prose and poetry by American Negro writers have preceded this one. This is 1941. All are useful to the student, but they generally represent either single types, such as James Weldon Johnson's book, Pioneering Book of American Negro Poetry, 1922, Newman White and Walter Clinton Jackson's An Anthology of American Negro Verse, 1924. Carter Woodson's Negro Orators and Their Orations, 1925. And he goes on to, they list all the other anthologies that come before them. And they say how this one is different. Well, the youngest person to be published in the poetry section, which begins with Phyllis Wheatley, by the way, the youngest person to be published in the poetry section of this book is the 26-year-old Margaret Walker, which is where we're going to end today with her famous poem, probably her most famous piece of work, For My People, on page 409. I timed it. It's about 5 minutes without rushing. So let's end with this on this weekend when we realize there's a lot going on in the African world. And we also realize that we all get to choose. And our choices will have more of an impact on us than they will on the institutions we choose to affiliate with, because there's always more people to choose to affiliate with our institutions and continue to reinforce the we in a way that the entire funky, violence prone world makes them shake in their boots and throw millions of dollars at you if you would just please don't do that, because they know what's at stake. Let's remember, let this ring in the ears of everybody at Jackson State who stays. Margaret Walker, for my people. For my people everywhere, singing their slave songs repeatedly, their dirges and their ditties and their blues and jubilees, praying their prayers nightly to an unknown God, bending their knees humbly to an unseen power. For my people, lending their strength to the years, to the gone years and the now years and the maybe years, washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing, digging, planting, pruning, patching, dragging along, never gaining, never reaping, never knowing, and never understanding. For my playmates in the clay and dust and sand of Alabama backyards, playing baptizing and preaching and doctor and jail and soldier and school and mama and cooking and playhouse and concert and store and Miss Chumby and hair and company. For the cramped, bewildered years, we went to school to learn to know the reasons why and the answers to, and the people who, and the places where, and the days when, in memory of the bitter hours when we discovered we were black and poor and small and different, and nobody wondered and nobody understood. For the boys and girls who grew in spite of these things to be man and woman, to laugh and dance and sing and play and drink their wine and religion and success, to marry their playmates and bear children and then die of consumption and anemia and lynching. For my people, thronging 47th Street in Chicago and Lenox Avenue in New York and Rampart Street in New Orleans, lost, disinherited, dispossessed, and happy people, filling the cabarets and taverns and other people's pockets, needing bread and shoes and milk and land and money and something all our own. For my people walking blindly, spreading joy, losing time being lazy, sleeping when hungry, shouting when burdened, drinking when hopeless, tired and shackled and tangled among ourselves by the unseen creatures who tower over us omnisciently and laugh. For my people blundering and groping and floundering in the dark of churches and schools and clubs and societies, associations and councils and committees and conventions, distressed and disturbed and deceived and devoured by money-hungry, glory-craving leeches, preyed on by the facile force of state and fad and novelty, by false prophet and holy believer. For my people standing, staring, trying to fashion a better way, from confusion, from hypocrisy and misunderstanding, trying to fashion a world that will hold all the peoples, all the faces, all the Adams and Eves in their countless generations. Finally, Margaret Walker Alexander writes, let a new earth rise, let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final clenching be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control. For my people. Deion, put that in your pocket, brother, because they ain't got that in Colorado. That's in Jackson, Mississippi with Margaret Walker and her people. You understand? Oh, by the way, she tells Charles Roll, when I said, people always ask me, who is Miss Chumbi? So we played Miss Chumbi. She said, my daddy and them taught us that Chumbi was an African word. So we didn't play Miss Smith or Miss Wilson, the white teacher. We played Miss Chumbi. So anytime you read For My People, understand Margaret Walker was gesturing to Africa in that phrase, because her daddy told her that's an African word.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
A lot to digest and think about. And I just, want to encourage everyone to think. Let's think deeply
Yes.
about all of the things that we're in. Let's center our intentions on what it is that we want to accomplish individually and collectively, especially. And as we head into this new year, this Kwanzaa season, this
Christmas, Hanukkah, holiday season,
all of it,
renewal season,
yes. Let's remember.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Carr.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you too. Love you, Nubians. See every one of them Nubian streets with Dr. Almond tomorrow, Monday. Oh, Sam Reynolds is gonna come in Sagittarius season, so we're gonna do that astrology.
Get them stars together.
We're gonna get it together, and then we got, of course, Meta Netra on Tuesday, Wednesday, yoga. We got Thursday. We're gonna maybe do some Mansa Musa. But and then Friday, we're heading into the real holidays. So love you, Dr. Carr. Love you all. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody.